the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Hello, good afternoon. I know you thought it was going to be Patrick. No, he's off there skiing somewhere. I'm Nana Queer. I'm in for Patrick Christys on GB News this afternoon. Now, coming up, the Labour leader has accused the Prime Minister of chasing headlines with new laws as Rishi Sunak looks to introduce new powers to tackle disruptive protests. The amendments to the Public Order Bill will allow police to intervene before protests become highly disruptive and give officers greater clarity about dealing with demonstrators blocking roads or slow marching. I want to know if you think there should be limits on the right to protest. Number 10 says the actions of the serving Met police officer who's admitted 49 offences, including 24 counts of rape over an 18-year period, are appalling. PC David Carrick appeared at Southwark Crown Court earlier. We'll bring you the latest. And with former Prime Minister Boris Johnson, was he right to put up a dinner cost for more than £4,000 on a government credit card whilst visiting the United Nations General Assembly in New York? Labour says the money could have given food to 10 infant school children for a year. As ever, get in touch, you know the coup. Email gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at gbnews. But first, let's get your latest news headlines.
Hello, good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 3. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. The government's plans to send asylum seekers to Rwanda is to be challenged at the Court of Appeal. It's after the High Court granted an appeal against its own ruling last month that said the scheme is lawful. However, campaigners say it's a cruel policy that will cause great human suffering. No date has been set for the hearing at the Court of Appeal. A Metropolitan Police officer has pleaded guilty to multiple offences, including 24 counts of rape over a 17-year period. David Carrick, a serving officer, carried out 49 offences against 12 women. Appearing at Southwark Crown Court, he admitted raping 9 of the women, some on numerous occasions over months or years. He's due to be sentenced early next month. Barbara Gray, Assistant Commissioner of the Met Police, praised his victims for coming forward.
I want to commend the outstanding bravery of the 13 women who came forward and reported the horrific crimes they were victims of. On behalf of the Metropolitan Police Service, I am truly sorry that they have suffered at the hands of this police officer. Carrick is a prolific serial sex offender who preyed on women over a period of many years.
London Mayor Sadiq Khan has called the circumstances appalling and says lessons must be learnt.
Vetting, when he first became an officer, should have meant alarm bells went off. They didn't. We also know when the review should have been taken 10 years after being a police officer, the vetting, that didn't uncover the things that should have been uncovered. So there are missed opportunities, and we've got to make sure there are no other examples of serving officers where there are missed opportunities.
The Foreign Secretary says he has been sanctioned by the Russian government. In a tweet, James Cleverly says he's happy to be sanctioned if it's the price for supporting Ukrainian freedom. Earlier today, Russia also claimed the British tanks will burn on the battlefield. But Downing Street says it's confident Ukrainian troops will use the tanks effectively. Jeremy Clarkson says he's emailed an apology to the Duke and Duchess of Sussex for saying he hated Meghan in a newspaper column. Clarkson posted a statement on his Instagram account saying he emailed the couple on Christmas Day to say his language had been disgraceful and he was profoundly sorry. His comments sparked backlash, with more than 20,000 complaints being made to the press regulator. The O2 Academy Brixton has had its licence suspended for 3 months after a deadly crowd crush last month. Lambeth Council says no licensable activities can take place during this period. Its decision comes after 2 people died when ticketless fans tried to enter a gig in December. 23-year-old security guard Gabby Hutchinson and 33-year-old Rebecca Ikumello were killed in a crowd surge. A third person remains critically ill. Downing Street is urging teachers not to strike and inflict what it's calling substantial damage to children's education. The plea comes as the results of ballots for strikes by 2 teaching unions are due to be announced today. Elsewhere, teachers in Scotland are beginning their 16 days of rolling strike action in an ongoing dispute over pay. Police in England and Wales could be given powers to intervene in protests before they become too disruptive. Parliament are today debating the amendment to the Public Order Bill, which would allow police to shut down demonstrations before they cause disruption. If passed, it would make it easier for officers to stop demonstrators blocking roads. Human rights group Liberty says the plan is an attack on the right to protest. But Policing Minister Chris Philp says the police should have a right to intervene when it impacts people's lives.
Of course we, as a government, fully respect the right to protest, but that does need to be properly balanced with the right of the general public to go about their day-to-day lives. And where some of these protesters have been deliberately trying to ruin the lives of their fellow citizens, we think that is not acceptable. But it's possible to protest while at the same time allowing ordinary citizens to go about their daily lives.
A 22-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of attempted murder following a drive-by shooting in central London. A 7-year-old girl has been left in a life-threatening condition. 4 women and a 12-year-old girl were also injured in the attack at a church in Euston on Saturday. The Princess Royal was among dignitaries who gathered in Athens today for the funeral of King Constantine of Greece. Princess Anne arrived for the funeral with her husband, Vice Admiral Sir Timothy Lawrence. Constantine II was a second cousin of King Charles and godfather to Prince William. He died last week at the age of 82. Royals from around the world attended the funeral. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now back to Nana.
So good afternoon. It's fast approaching 8 minutes after 3 o'clock. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akwir. Now, a controversial expansion of police powers could give officers the opportunity to shut down protests before they cause serious disruption. Now, the aim of it is to crack down on environmental groups such as Just Stop Oil and Extinction Rebellion, who use these so-called guerrilla tactics like blocking roads and slow marching to get their message across. But the proposals have caused a backlash from some peers who say this amendment is an attack on people's right to protest. The Policing Minister, Chris Philp, responded to these claims.
Of course we, as a government, fully respect the right to protest, but that does need to be properly balanced with the right of the general public to go about their day-to-day lives. And where some of these protesters have been deliberately trying to ruin the lives of their fellow citizens, we think that is not acceptable. But it's possible to protest while at the same time allowing ordinary citizens to go about their daily lives.
Well, our GB News political reporter Olivia Utley joins me now. Now, Olivia, is Rishi Sunak facing a lot of backlash for this proposal?
It's expected that he will face some backlash, particularly in the Lords, where we know that peers have previously voted down any sort of measures that the government has attempted to introduce to try and curtail the rights of protesters. He's also will face a backlash from the libertarian right of his own party, who are already making a bit of noise about this because they're worried that it's a sort of slippery slope to the end of free speech. And then, of course, he will face a big pushback from Labour, who are supportive of many of these environmental protesters and are supportive generally of the right to protest. The way Sunak and his government will frame it is that it's not curtailing the rights of protesters at all. That's not the aim of the bill. The purpose of the bill is simply to clarify existing law, essentially, because at the moment we're in a situation where police officers don't know where their power begins and ends. And, for example, with slow marching, people walking slowly on the streets and holding up traffic entirely, bringing London to a standstill, police last year were unsure whether they were legally allowed to intervene. So Sunak's defence of it and framing of it will be that it's simply for clarification.
But haven't they got enough powers? I mean, you know, they can actually do all the things that they're trying to do in this anyway. So what is the point? I mean, there's one bit in it where it's extending the powers to manage public assemblies. Now, this bit, so this is an extension of what they're planning to do, which means that it can extend powers to manage things. So, for example, single people protesting and groups of people protesting and noise as well. I mean, this feels like they're closing in, they're being very specific, and a lot of innocent people who are just protesting normally will be caught in this crossfire.
Well, the government's argument is that quite a lot of the way that the legislation works already isn't that clear. And, for example, the slow marching issue, the issue of whether you're allowed to forestall a protest and close it down, a potentially disruptive process before it begins, or whether you're not. So the government's argument is that it's just clarification. I mean, the big question hovering over all of this is what exactly will count as the definition of serious disruption, because that's what the government is going to say, that any protest which causes serious disruption should be under this law. But it's not quite clear what serious disruption means. So the government's calling for clarity, essentially, in this bill, but isn't being particularly clear itself.
Well, that is the problem, isn't it? And that's the problem that they were having before, because it seems like the officers don't appear to know where the line is. And that means it's in the hands of certain officers who are going to make that decision. And what might be really disruptive to one might not be disruptive to others. And this can also stop things before they actually happen, which is what it sounds like.
Well, exactly. And the government, there are plenty of police officers who support this bill because they say that so far the legislation hasn't been clear enough. There is a decent argument to be made that pretty much everything which this bill will allow was actually already allowed under current law, and that just the police need to be more aware of what they're legally empowered to do. But the government is just hoping that a straightforward bill like this will help to clarify things. And I think there might also be a bit of a political element because Rishi Sunak is facing quite a lot. He's fighting on quite a lot of different fronts at the moment. And in some respects, he's looking quite politically weak. We know that he's trying to negotiate with these 40 rebels about the online harms bill. 40 rebels is pretty bad. And we saw the same thing with wind turbines a couple of months ago. So I think Rishi Sunak is making a sort of political calculation here that protests are very unpopular with the public. Protests are pretty unpopular with conservative backbenchers, disruptive protests. So I think he's hoping that this will be a sort of easy political win for him, which will also make him look tough.
I'm not so sure about that. I mean, they have got a couple of things that are new offences. So obstructing major transport networks is one of the new ones, and a new offence of interfering with key national infrastructure. And then there's one more, which is criminalising causing serious disruption by tunnelling. So I suppose they are being very specific, but ultimately those things come under the umbrella of the previous legislation anyway.
I mean, not to get too technical about it, but there are elements of the bill which will change what is allowed as a protest. But as the government, there are elements of it which still are very unclear. For example, where they just use the word serious disruption and it isn't clear exactly what that means. So for a bill that's aiming at clarification, I'm not quite sure that it's doing what it says on the tin.
Well, Olivia, that's Olivia Utley, our GBNews political reporter. I'm asking, should there be limits on people's right to protest? I'm joined now by former editor of The Sun, Calvin Mackenzie. Calvin, thank you very much for joining me. What's your view on this? Where do you stand with this?
Well, I mean, there are probably two separate, rather baffling aspects to why anybody should object to this. The first one is that they said, I've heard the lefties, they are all specifically, by the way, socialists. I've heard them all complaining that, in fact, the police don't need these powers. They definitely do need these powers. If you just read what any of the chief constables have said today, what is not clear to them is what they can do and when they can do it. So you get that bizarre position on the M25 at regular places, especially near where I live. I live out in Weybridge. So on junctions 10 or 11 or 9, it's been a nightmare. And what happens, these people turn up with these abilities to climb up onto gantries. And once they get up there, then all the traffic has to stop. And so the police officers see the people there, don't act against them, and only act when they actually get up on the gantry. Now, under this legislation, they can act before the actual massive protest starts, when you know something's going to happen. For instance, if you see somebody with a knife walking through Soho and you think that they're going to stab somebody, you can arrest them. This is exactly the same with these kinds of protesters. And the idea that walking down the middle of the road is not something that you can specifically act against because the police haven't been acting against it, I've no idea why, right, then is absolutely mad. So this is a great piece of legislation. You know, these rather strange people who seem to have a lot of spare time on their hands, presumably being funded by the taxpayer through their benefits payments, right, seem to be able to work out fresh ways of causing trouble all the time. But in this case, I see a whole load of their alleyways being locked down. That legislation about the tunnelling, what a fantastic idea that is, because people have been doing that. Now, to my mind, I can remember, it must be 30 odd years ago, since they first started doing that. So I'm delighted that that's been shut down. I don't feel sorry for the protesters. They can still carry on protesting. But what they've got to know is that they're going to get arrested for doing it. At the moment, it's a free shot.
Well, listen, I could also bring in environmental activist Jeff Bazard, and former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie, is still with me too. OK, Jeff, well, you know, what's wrong with this legislation? Surely, you know, you're allowed to protest. It's not stopping you from protesting, but it's just saying some of the tactics that you employ will be criminalised.
Well, they are at the moment. You can arrest people crossing the road for obstruction. You can do that already. I doubt, in fact, having scanned the news, that Kelvin can find more than one senior police officer who's actually backed this. I've looked at all the media this morning, and there's only been the Deputy Assistant Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police. And it's a nonsense. Hang on, Kelvin. It's a nonsense to suggest that our police, our intelligence services, undercover police officers, all of whom will be scrutinising every aspect from breakfast to nightcap of all of these protesters, don't know what's going on. That's effectively what you're saying. And it would require a degree of clairvoyance from a detective or a police officer to know in advance what an environmental protester is going to do. So, I mean, you'll remember, Kelvin, you know, because you've got a good memory, Doris Stokes and her ability to forecast a future which fell over every opportunity because she couldn't even ghostwrite her own biography. So protest is a long and honourable tradition. If it doesn't disrupt, there's no point. Now, the issue here is, if you want to stop protests, I've got 110% perfect solution. Sit down with the protesters, look at their demands, work out a sensible, pragmatic timetable for implementing them. Job done.
Well, listen, Kelvin, he's got a point. It is a bit Minority Report-esque, isn't it? I mean, they're predicting you're going to do it. They could get that wrong.
Well, they haven't got that wrong. By the way, just to correct, I know that your other colleague there may not like facts, but in fact, the guy who actually has come out 101% in favour of it is the National Police Chiefs Council Lead for Public Order and Public Safety, Chief Constable B.J. Harrington. You can't get higher up than Mr. Harrington. So let's just dismiss the idea that police officers aren't 1,001% behind this. On the other issue of protest, I am not in favour of protests where ordinary people are driving to work because a load of barn pots have decided for some inexplicable reason that oil is the number one devil in the world. I am not in favour of having any law that stops them doing it before it disrupts me going to work, before a plumber gets to work, before a nurse gets to work, before a doctor gets to work. I'm 101% in favour.
So you're against road accidents then, and road works and congestion caused by the overuse of roads and people not willing to get on the train to go to work.
Really? So you're against cars, are you? Really? Right. Well, that really is the end. Right. Men against cars. Honestly, we're just fine with cars.
Let Jeff finish, Calvin.
Calvin, there's regular disruption on the roads. You face it every time you drive. It's caused by one person in 13 foot of slowly rusting metal. And the answer to the issue here is, well, the Peasants' Revolt wrong? Were Chartist protesters wrong? Was the Peterloo massacre, the people who were 13 miles away killed by a militia, in the 19th century? Were the suffragettes wrong? What is an acceptable form of public protest then, do you think?
Well, you can still protest.
I think you have to go back way into history to find anything that supports your argument. And right today, I would say people had more rights through the power of social media than through politicians in order to get their way. You haven't got support in this manner, so you literally get together a half a dozen of nutbums and try and destroy the ability of ordinary people to go about their business. That moment has now come to an end.
Listen, thank you so much.
Well, it hasn't.
We're going to have to leave it there. I'd love to talk to you both for ages. This is a great discussion, but running out of time. Kelvin McKenzie, former editor of The Sun, and also Jeff Gazzard, environmental activist. You're with me, I'm Nana Akwe. This is GB News. I'm in for Patrick all this week. Coming up, I'll be discussing Rishi Sunak's proposed anti-strike laws, which would require unions to maintain a minimum service in the public sector. Now, the RMT union is holding an emergency demonstration outside Downing Street tonight, and teachers in Scotland are out on strike today. We'll cross live to Glasgow next, but let's take a look at the weather.
Hi there, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. The cold weather stays with us both overnight and through the next few days, with frosty conditions expected widely, and for some, snow and ice. Although the snow and ice won't affect everyone, the wintry precipitation is coming in the form of showers on a northerly wind, those showers forming over relatively warm seas compared with the air, and so quite a number of showers coming into the north and into the west as well overnight. Primarily northern Scotland, Northern Ireland, northwest England, North Wales and parts of Cornwall seeing a mixture of rain, sleet and snow. Most of the snow in the southwest affecting hills, but for Northern Ireland, for northwest Scotland, that snow coming down to lower levels. So further significant accumulations, icy patches first thing, could be tricky on the roads during Tuesday morning. And certainly where we avoid the showers, it's going to be a cold one. Temperatures widely below freezing and some spots well below freezing. But although it will be cold, plenty of bright weather out there first thing Tuesday. For the vast majority, actually, it's not going to be snowing. It's going to be sunny for the south and the east in particular. Further showers coming into the north and the northwest. And it's going to be cold wherever you are. Temperatures at around 2 to 4 Celsius up and down the country, and below that over Northern Hills. Northern Hills seeing the most significant snow accumulations, but some more persistent snow coming in at lower levels in the far north of Scotland during Tuesday night. Although I think for the Northern Isles, for the far north mainland Scotland, it will be a mixture of rain and sleet at lower levels, but that's accompanied by a strong wind. In fact, gales developing in the north of Scotland, so blizzards and drifting snow, particularly over the hills of Aberdeenshire, Caithness and Sutherland. And then that system comes southwards as we start off Wednesday. Another frosty start across the country. Further showers of sleet and snow coming into Northern Ireland, Wales, southwest England and northern Scotland. Once again seeing the lion's share of snow on Wednesday and into Thursday. Thursday sees the showers increasingly affecting eastern areas. Western areas seeing drier and brighter weather.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison? I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Good afternoon. If you just joined me, I'm Nana Akwe, in for Patrick Christy. We're live here on GB News, on TV, online and on digital radio. Now, lots of you have been getting in touch with your views, your thoughts on this public order bill. Now, Eileen says, I'm glad the government is finally doing something about these protesters who disrupt citizens going about their lives and even preventing people attending medical appointments and even emergency ambulances. Yeah, but the thing is, though, this could sort of interrupt normal people, the people who aren't protesting. What if they get it wrong? I mean, you know, they have enough powers already. Let's see what Deborah's saying. Deborah says, most people want the police to use the powers they already have. Absolutely, I'm with you, Deborah. To remove protesters from sitting on the public highway. I mean, that is already illegal, actually, so I don't quite get why they need to extend them. It's weird because I'm actually thinking that I'm beginning to agree with Just Stop Oil on this one, which is worrying. Jordan says, I can see what the government is trying to do, but this does worry me as to what will follow these amendments. And he's got a good point there as well, because I mean, basically, they will determine if you're tunnelling, obviously that's illegal. That was always illegal anyway. It was always illegal to sit in the middle of the motorway in any case. I don't know why the government don't just get on with it. Now, the government is being accused now of attempting to steamroller through new legislation on strikes. Everybody seems to be on strike at the moment. Now, the bill which is being debated in the House of Commons today would set minimum service levels that must be met by law during periods of industrial action. It's been criticised as spiteful and anti-strike. And this comes as Scottish teachers have begun a 16-day wave of rolling strikes, and the result of the ballot for teachers in England and Wales is expected later. We're joined now by our new Scotland reporter, Tony Maguire, for more. Tony, welcome. Good to talk to you. Is this your first day?
Thank you.
Tony? It's first day, is it? Right, here we go. Well, listen, why are the teachers striking?
So the teachers up here, today marks the first day of the third round of industrial action from Scotland's teachers. The Educational Institute of Scotland has taken point for the next 16 days. Every day, two local authorities will go on strike. Today is Glasgow and East Lothian. Teachers are wanting a 10% increase. The Scottish Government are just saying that's unaffordable.
Unfortunately, we haven't heard much from the Cabinet Secretary of Education, but who we have heard from today has been the Scottish Conservative Shadow Education Secretary, Stephen Kerr. And he has wasted no time in putting some language into the press release, saying that Shirley-Ann Somerville is failing the children of Scotland. Now, the sun is setting here in Glasgow and on the first day of strikes. But I spoke with Andrea Bradley earlier on. She is the Secretary-General of Educational Institute Scotland, and she's angry, as are much of the teachers. Let's hear what she has to say.
So the mood among members is one of they're resolute, they continue to be resolute, they're turning out in good numbers and in high spirits on picket lines across the city and across East Lothian today. But it has to be said that they are angry. They are angry that almost a year since the pay claim for 10% was lodged, there is still nothing more than 5% sitting on the table, and that's been there really for 6 months. So they're angry at that, they're angry at the inaction of the Scottish Government and COSLA and the lack of urgency shown by them to really bring a satisfactory resolution to this dispute.
And there we have it. Now, parents have just had a chance to digest this 16 days of strike, and before even the weekend we heard about a further 22 days planned for February into March, and on that occasion we're going to see schools off for 3 consecutive days at a time in each local authority. Now, parents, I spoke with lots of members of the public earlier on today, and certainly there is real mixed opinion. Have these strikes been going on so long now? We'll just need to wait and see what kind of agreement the Scottish Government and EIS and Scottish Teachers' Unions are able to come up with.
Well, thank you very much, Tony. That's Tony Maguire. He's our Scotland reporter. Thank you so much. It's the kids I feel sorry for. I mean, if you think about it, through the pandemic, there was a pretty dodgy school then, and now, obviously, the teachers going on strike. Well, if you just join me, welcome aboard. It's just coming up to 31 minutes after 3 o'clock. I'm Nana Aqued. This is GB News. Next up, more on the serving Met police officer who pleaded guilty to a series of rapes over an 18-year period. But first, let's get your latest news headlines.
Hello, good afternoon. It's 3:31. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. A Metropolitan Police officer has pleaded guilty to multiple offences, including 24 counts of rape over an 18-year period. David Carrick, a serving officer, carried out 49 offences against 12 women. Appearing at Southwark Crown Court, he admitted raping 9 of the women, some on numerous occasions over months or years. He's due to be sentenced early next month. Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper says change is needed to avoid this repeating in the future.
This man was a serial rapist who's committed devastating crimes against women. It's tribute to their bravery that he's been caught, but he should never have been a police officer. He should never have been allowed to serve for so long. After the appalling murder of Sarah Everard, the government promised us change, yet that has totally failed. There have been no national standards on vetting or conduct introduced, and women have been badly let down. We have to have fundamental change.
The government's plans to send asylum seekers to Rwanda is to be challenged at the Court of Appeal. It's after the High Court granted an appeal against its own ruling last month that said the scheme is lawful. However, campaigners say it's a cruel policy that will cause great human suffering. No date has been set for the hearing for the Court of Appeal. The O2 Academy Brixton has had its licence suspended for another 3 months after a deadly crush last month there. Lambeth Council's decision comes following the death of 2 people who died when ticketless fans tried to enter the venue. 23-year-old security guard Gabby Hutchinson and 33-year-old Rebecca Ikumelo were killed in the incident. Jeremy Clarkson says he's emailed an apology to the Duke and Duchess of Sussex for saying he hated Meghan in a newspaper column. Clarkson posted a statement on his Instagram account saying he emailed the couple on Christmas Day to say his language had been disgraceful and that he was profoundly sorry. His comments sparked backlash, with more than 20,000 complaints being made to the press regulator. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Good afternoon. It's just coming up to 36 minutes after 3 o'clock. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akweer. Now, a serving Metropolitan Police officer has been revealed as one of Britain's most prolific sex offenders after admitting attacking a dozen women over an 18-year period. Now, the forces apologised to the victims after it emerged that PC David Carrick had come to the attention of police over 9 incidents, including allegations of rape, domestic violence and harassment between 2000 and 2021. The 48-year-old, who joined the Met in 2001 before becoming an armed officer with the Parliamentary and Diplomatic Protection Command in 2009, faced no criminal sanctions or misconduct findings. Ajazwat Nawal, the chief Crown prosecutor at the CPS Thames and at Chiltern, spoke outside Southwark Crown Court earlier today.
This is one of the most shocking cases the Crown Prosecution Service has dealt with involving a serving police officer. Anyone hearing of the 49 counts David Carrick has pleaded guilty to against 12 victims would agree the sheer magnitude of his offending is horrifying. Today, the victims who suffered at the hands of David Carrick have finally seen justice. It is their courage in standing up against this heinously abusive man, a police officer, that has helped to secure his conviction.
Well, let's speak to Danny Shaw, a crime, justice and policing commentator. Now, a serial offender at the heart of our police. How shocking is this? I mean, this is awful.
Good afternoon, Nana. This is a shocking case. And this man is one of the most prolific sexual predators and rapists in this country's history. And he is the worst there has ever been in the police service. That is the scale of it. And the offences are shocking enough. The coercive control that he used against some of his victims, the abuse that he inflicted upon them, unspeakable attacks that he committed over a long period of time, that is bad enough. And the victims have suffered horrifically, and it's quite likely that there are more victims as well. The police believe that there are more victims who will come forward. What is so much worse and compounds it is the fact that he should never have been admitted to the police service. The Metropolitan Police was aware of 2 allegations made by an ex-partner of his before he submitted his application. And yet the force allowed him in. And then there were 7 occasions on which allegations were made against David Carrick in one form or another, either to the Met Police or to other forces, and yet no one joined the dots, looked at this individual and said, what is going on with this man? How can he be an officer? And took action to get him out of the force and investigate those allegations. It's an appalling failure, I think, by the Met Police.
Well, it's an absolute disgrace. And he was doing it over a period of time, and it seems that they must have been, someone somewhere within the force would have been aware of this. And it's unbelievable that he wasn't actually caught out or immediately dismissed and prosecuted. But this isn't the first time that a Met serving officer has committed serious crimes. How damaging do you think this is for the force?
Look, I think this is very damaging. There have been a series of scandals over the past few years of one kind or another. But I think what marks this out is that the offending took place over a 20-year period, and some of it was very recent. This is not a case of the Met being able to say, well, these are historical events going back to the 1990s or the early 2000s, and it's all very different now. The most recent allegation was made in the summer of 2021, just 18 months ago, an accusation of rape against David Carrick. Was he suspended? No, he wasn't. He was placed on restricted duties. And then when the Hertfordshire police, who were investigating that allegation, decided not to take any action, those restrictions were lifted. I mean, it's extraordinary. So we're looking at the recent past here for these allegations and recent procedures and so on. And we're told by the Met, well, the vetting has changed, everything's different now. I'm not really sure that it is. The Met is currently conducting a review of around over, I think, 1,600 cases involving over 1,000 police officers and staff. That's about 2% of its workforce, in which allegations of sexual offending or domestic abuse have been made and resolved over the past 10 years, to see whether any of those officers should face further restrictions or should be removed from the police. That's very worrying, that scale of allegations. This is the police service. These are the upholders of the law. It really goes to a problem of culture, I think, in the police. In certain pockets of the police, there are thousands of the brilliant, dedicated police officers who have the utmost integrity. I've met many of them during my time covering crime and home affairs. Really fantastic officers, but there are pockets within policing that allow this kind of behaviour, these sorts of attitudes to fester and to remain. And there has to be a cultural overhaul to get rid of it.
Because I can't imagine how it could be so bad. Do you think it's got something to do with the fact that we were trying to get, say, 20,000 new officers or more and more officers, so they've got lackadaisical about this, about getting officers employed within the police? I don't get how somebody like that can carry on like that and nobody stops them until, well, they've been doing it for, what, 20 years or whatever. I mean, that's ridiculous.
Well, there needs to be an inquiry, I think, to find out about the vetting failings. And I see that Baroness Louise Casey, who's conducting a review of the Metropolitan Police culture and standards and ethics, has called on the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, to set up an inquiry into Carrick's conduct and find out why all these missed opportunities took place. And she has volunteered to do that inquiry herself. Her report will be published in March into wider problems in the police. There needs to be an inquiry to understand what happened in 2001 when those vetting checks were carried out. What happened on those other occasions when allegations were raised? Was there someone who was just dismissing it? Was there someone who was just trying to protect this individual? We need to know the answers to that to understand really what's at the heart of the problem. It's been no secret, Nana, that there have been vetting failings in the Met Police and in other police forces for a number of years. Some of that is down to staffing and resources, yes, but some of it also, I think, is a lack of curiosity, a lack of professional curiosity, and an acceptance that certain types of behaviour will be tolerated. And quite clearly, this is what happens. This is the result of that when you allow that sort of attitude to sort of grow in a police service.
I'm just getting sick and tired of hearing all these different incidents. Danny Shaw, thank you very much for joining me. He's a crime, justice and policing commentator. Well, stay with me. In other news, a 7-year-old girl remains in critical condition following a shooting in North London over the weekend, which left 6 people injured. A man has been arrested on suspicion of attempted murder in connection with what's believed to be a drive-by shooting outside a Catholic church near Euston Station. For the latest, we can go to our reporter Theo Chakomba, who's in Euston for us now. Theo, what have we got? What's the update?
Yes, so what we know at the moment is that the Metropolitan Police have described this as a senseless act of violence. Here on my left there's a church, and on Saturday afternoon around 300 people were here for a memorial for a 20-year-old girl and her mother who passed away in November last year. Now, in terms of the incident itself, we understand from the Metropolitan Police that a black car drove past and it was a shooting which they believe was used by a shotgun. So at the moment we understand a number of people were injured. 4 women were injured, including a 48-year-old woman who sustained potentially life-changing injuries. And of course we also understand some children were injured as well. A 12-year-old girl sustained a leg injury, and a 7-year-old remains in hospital. She's stable but has a life-threatening condition at the moment. We've heard this afternoon from the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, about this incident, and this is what he had to say.
Euston on Saturday in Euston was a senseless act of violence. To carry a gun, let alone use a gun in London, is unacceptable, but to use a gun at a funeral beggars belief. I've been in close contact with the Met Police Service since Saturday afternoon. And I'm sure I speak for Londoners when I say our thoughts are with the victims who have been affected. My promise is to continue to be tough on crime by investing in the police at a time the government's made big cuts, but also to invest in the complex causes of crime as well.
We've also heard from the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, about this incident. She tweeted saying that she's deeply concerned by the shocking shooting. In terms of the police in this area, they'll be holding a meeting later this week on Thursday where residents and people who are in this area can ask about what's happened, but also give their thoughts on the safety in this area and more about the incident that happened on Saturday afternoon.
Theo Chakomba, thank you very much. If you just join me, I'm Nana Akwe in for Patrick. We're moving on to other news. The former Prime Minister Boris Johnson is facing some criticism after reports that he put a dinner costing more than £4,000 on a government credit card whilst he was in New York. An entourage of 24 people joined him for a meal and alcoholic drinks whilst attending the United Nations General Assembly on the 21st of September in 2021. Now, Labour says that the money spent is exactly the amount it would cost to feed 10 infant school children for a year. Was he right to splash the cash? I'm joined now by political editor of the Sunday Mirror and Sunday People, Nigel Nelson. Also with me is political commentator and strategist Peter Barnes. Right, Nigel, I'm going to start with you. Nigel, so was he right? Come on, £4,000. He's taking out some quite high-power, highbrow people, possibly in line with his work. £4,000 is not that much, is it? It's got to be a nice venue. If it's to do with work, what's the problem?
Well, the question is it to do with work? What it looks like is that he was taking his number 10 team out for dinner after they'd finished work. They'd been at the UN General Assembly all day. Now, no one's saying that the Prime Minister must queue up at McDonald's to get a quick burger. But when it comes down to spending this kind of taxpayers' money, it just shows his cavalier disregard. Now, I think £4,000 on a meal is actually a lot of money, especially when you consider that it cost £177 a head for each person who was eating there.
Well, yes, you say that, but I mean, that was in America, right? I mean, they always charge 10% on top of that. You know, 10% would have been tip. I mean, are the Labour Party not just splitting hairs with this? Because surely if they're going out with regard to work, you can't really, as you said, you can't really go to McDonald's. Peter Barton, political commentator, what do you think?
Oh, I don't necessarily disagree with Nigel that it's a particularly large amount of money, but when we talk about the Labour Party and cavalier attitudes, if we're really going to split hairs over things, should we talk about Angela Rayner and her use of expenses? Not 2 years ago, she was called indulgent in them. You know, she spent £250 on a pair of AirPods, which are personalised, which were apparently essential for her to work at home. I don't understand how that's really, if we're going to get all morally outraged about things, why were we outraged about Boris? We're not outraged about this. this. Let's not also forget that Angela Rayner used taxpayer money to pay gas and electric bill just last year, while she's saying that, you know, the Tories are, you know, profiting off the back of poor people and all the rest of it. Well, I'm not being funny. You can't play this game both ways, but the Labour Party, in their usual fashion right now, are doing just that. This just seems to be like typical Boris bashing because everybody wants to be outraged for 15 minutes before we move on to the next thing.
Nigel?
Well, I mean, the question really is not actually having dinner, it's the kind of money being spent. So, I mean, most private businesses, if people are sent away, they're given an allowance of about £30 to £50 for an evening meal, which seems to be about right. Now, it's rather like Boris Johnson decorating the Downing Street flat. No one blames him for doing that. He had every right to have decorations there. But do you spend £800 a roll on wallpaper? What we're talking about here is the way that he splashed taxpayer money around. And the argument was it's not necessary. I'm not defending other MPs who've actually put things on their expenses when they shouldn't have done. That's why there's been a clampdown on that since. And even select committee trips abroad for MPs, they can't charge the taxpayer for alcohol. They have to actually buy that out of their own pocket. Now, Boris Johnson didn't. And on top of that, he appears to have put the whole thing on Liz Truss's Foreign Office credit card anyway.
Well, perhaps we shouldn't mention Liz Truss, because she could get a pension for 44 days in office, Peter.
Well, I don't disagree with Nigel, but I think the more important question is, well, how was this all approved in the first place? That's the real question we should be asking here. What are the rules? What can MPs actually claim on their expenses? And are those the right rules? I don't necessarily disagree that, you know, I think it is an extortionate amount of money and we have to pay close attention to what MPs are spending, particularly because I don't think trust has been re-earned after the 2009 expenses scandal. I still think, you know, MPs are still seen as being on the take. But, again, we've got to have a proper conversation about this, and I'm not quite sure that just pointing out Boris Johnson and his dinner tab is exactly the way to go about it.
Because it does seem a bit divisive, just picking on him, when we could pick on a lot of MPs who have behaved in a manner that we would say, well, hang on a minute, why are you spending that? And with regard to £4 grand, I think for the stature and the kind of people that he'll be entertaining, it's a lot of money, but not so much. I mean, are we not just splitting hairs, Nigel?
Well, I mean, in fact, we are actually looking at all MPs. What this comes out of is parliamentary questions put down by the Shadow Attorney General, Emily Thornberry. And what she's been doing is examining exactly how the government procurement card, which is effectively official plastic that we pay for, is being used. So there are an awful lot of other people who've been spending on it. The reason that Boris Johnson stands out is so far, according to this trawl, he's spent the most. And the question comes down to, do people think that is a legitimate expense, £177 per head, on a meal after work?
Well, I mean, I don't know. It depends what kind of meal. I think they're all splitting hairs here. I mean, I think the MPs are overpaid and they don't do a good enough job as far as I'm concerned. But Nigel Nelson, thank you very much for joining me. And also Peter Barnes, thank you so much. Right, well, we're moving on because retail giant Marks & Spencer's is set to open 20 bigger and better stores in locations across the UK in the next financial year, creating 3,400 jobs. And over in Switzerland, the World Economic Forum kicks off today in Davos amid fears of a global recession. Business leaders from across the globe will meet to discuss key economic areas, including the war in Ukraine, inflation and climate change. So joining me now is our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, with On the Money. Right, Liam, let's start with M&S. I love M&S.
You an M&S fan?
I am, actually. I love the food. It's so good.
This is, of course, a retailing thoroughbred. It's 139 years old, a real British institution, very iconic brand. And this is Blue Monday, not a New Order song in this...
I was thinking
that ages us, doesn't it? I know you are. I can see it in your little eyes. You go... It's not a Blue Monday song. It's not a New Order song. In this case, it's the day when we're meant to be the most depressed event because Christmas has gone, we're getting all our credit card bills.
Oh, I didn't realise that.
Not much sunlight and so on. Yeah, so on this Blue Monday, though, a bit of good news because M&S says that it's opening 20 new stores, including stores in Birmingham, Leeds, Manchester and Liverpool.
Is it just the food, or did they?
No,
do clothes as well?
they're going to open some what they call full line stores. So that includes clothes and everything else, all the other good stuff that M&S sells. And M&S is saying, but by the end of 2025, they're going to have 420 food stores and 180 full line stores, and that has to be good news, hasn't it? On the other hand, this is Blue Monday. The M&S clever PR people, they know they're going to be looking for a bit of good news to put on the telly. And what they don't say in their press release is that back in October, they said they were going to close 67 stores.
Yeah, they did.
So you'll remember that. I think I remember talking to you about it at the time because you were interested in the story in particular. So stores come and stores go. You know, M&S is a huge retail operation. At any one time, they'll always be opening some stores and closing some others. That's how retail works at that level. But, you know, this has to be good news. 20 new M&S stores, including in some big cities outside of London, as I said, and some small towns too. Hopefully, 3,500 jobs.
That's all good, isn't it?
Yeah.
And also, we've got some stories about big business leaders that come together today. Could you tell me more about that?
Yeah, so Davos is a kind of chocolate box Swiss mountain resort. It's a very kind of ski venue for the wealthy. And this World Economic Forum has been going on for many, many years. This is the first time it's gathered for 3 years because of lockdown. And it's the kind of place you get the big investment banks, the JP Morgans, the Goldman Sachs, the big oil companies, Chevron, Esso and Shell. You get big political high rollers. You get, you know, journalists who may be like schmoozing up to billionaires and maybe trying to get a job at some stage. No names mentioned.
I might pop down there. Billionaires, did you say?
No names mentioned. But for a lot of people watching this, and indeed a lot of people in general, Davos symbolises something. It's a bit of a closed shop. Not many general members of the public are there. Quite a lot of the forums are closed to the public. It's a situation where lots of elected leaders are rubbing shoulders throughout the day with business leaders, but big businesses. Small businesses don't get a look in general at places like Davos. So some people think this World Economic Forum is a bit too controlly, maybe, you know, a little bit sinister in some way. They would, of course, deny that. They would say, look, we got to get together and talk about important issues. Davos's theme this year is cooperation in a fragmented world, obviously, because we've got Russia, Ukraine, we've got lots of animosity between China and the US. It does feel a bit more fragmented. So they would say they're just getting people together. Interestingly, Rishi Sunak isn't going to be there this year.
Oh, really?
Doesn't go down too well when
He might change his mind. He
did. But hobnobbing with the global elite when you're in the cost of living crisis for the same reason, or maybe not for the same reason, but Joe Biden isn't there either. I'll tell you who is there, though.
He's probably working out stuff in his garage at the moment, isn't he?
His sums. Don't at me. I'll tell you who is there.
We've got to move on because we've got about a minute and a half left.
I'll tell you who is there, though.
Yeah.
At Davos, the owners of Man United, because they're looking for a buyer.
Oh, really? Sell out. Right, and finally, house prices.
So house prices, it's, you know, that perennial subject. If you're in the pub at a dinner party, everyone's talking about house prices. And house prices have actually been coming down since October. These are asking prices because I'm citing data from Rightmove, which is like an estate agency. These aren't actually achieved prices, they're asking prices. But asking prices have been coming down since October. Yet, in January, the latest figures show, and these are unofficial figures so far, house prices actually rose. So according to Rightmove, the average house in terms of asking price was £362,000, 438. That's up £3,300 in a single, from January 2023, going back to January 2022. So if you own a house, if you're lucky enough to be a property owner, high house prices, fill your boots. But for so many of our viewers and their kids, these rising house prices are just pulling up the drawbridge of home ownership.
Well, listen, Liam, thank you very much. Good to talk to you. That's Liam Halligan.
You'll have Blue Monday on your mind now.
It's Blue Monday. No. Right, if you just joined me, welcome on board. You're with me. I'm Nana Akweer. This is GB News. I'm in for Patrick Christys. Coming up, as the government look to give police more powers for some disruptive protests, we'll bring you all the latest on serving metropolitan officers. That's coming up after this.
every morning from 6 o'clock. We'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here. You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio or online, every morning it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere. Amazing! You see, amazing! You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel. Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful. Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel. It's just gone 4 o'clock. You're with me. I'm Nana Akwe. I'm in for Patrick Christys on GB News this afternoon. Coming up this hour, police could be allowed to intervene before protests become highly disruptive. That is under new measures set to be considered in Parliament. An amendment to the Public Order Bill will aim to give police greater clarity about when they can intervene to stop demonstrators blocking roads or slow marching. And campaigners say it will limit our right to protest, but do you agree? Now, a serving Metropolitan Police officer has been revealed as one of Britain's most prolific sex offenders after admitting attacking a dozen women over an 18-year period. The force have apologised to victims after it emerged that PC David Carrick had come to the attention of the police over 9 incidents, including allegations of rape, domestic violence and harassment between 2000 and 2021. We'll bring you the latest and ask, can we trust our police? And would you back reforms to the benefit system, which would see job hunters who've been recently made redundant receiving up to 80% of their salary whilst they look for a new job? The think tank Bright Blue warned that the UK does not provide enough of a financial cushion for the short-term out of work, whilst being more generous to the long-term jobless than other countries. As ever, get in touch. Let me know what you think. You can email gbnews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at gbnews. But first, let's get your latest news headlines. Nana, thank you and good afternoon to you. The Home Secretary has been told a full inquiry should be held to consider how serial sex offender David Carrick was able to serve as a Metropolitan Police officer. Baroness Casey, who's conducting a Met Police Standards review, has called for the inquiry. Carrick has pleaded guilty to 49 offences relating to 12 women, including 24 counts of rape over a 17-year period. Appearing at Southwark Crown Court, the serving officer admitted raping 9 of the women, some on numerous occasions. He's due to be sentenced next month. Suella Braverman says standards in the police force must change.
Well, it's clear that today is a sobering day for the Metropolitan Police Service and indeed for the whole policing family throughout the country. This appalling incident represents a breach of trust. It will affect people's confidence in the police, and it's clear that standards and culture need to change in policing. And that's why I'm driving forward changes to support the police and to support chief constables around the country in doing so.
Well, the Shadow Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, has backed Baroness Casey's call for an inquiry into Carrick's case and says change is needed to avoid this being replicated in the future.
This man was a serial rapist who's committed devastating crimes against women. It's tribute to their bravery that he's been caught, but he should never have been a police officer. He should never have been allowed to serve for so long. After the appalling murder of Sarah Everard, the government promised us change, yet that has totally failed. There have been no national standards on vetting or conduct introduced, and women have been badly let down. We have to have fundamental change.
The government's plans to send asylum seekers to Rwanda is to be challenged in the Court of Appeal. That comes after the High Court granted an appeal against its own ruling last month that said the scheme is lawful. However, campaigners say it's a cruel policy that will cause great human suffering. No date has been set for the hearing for the Court of Appeal. The Foreign Secretary says he's been sanctioned by the Russian government. In a tweet, James Cleverly says he's happy to be sanctioned if it's the price to pay for supporting Ukrainian freedom. Earlier on today, Russia also claimed the British tanks will burn on the battlefield. But Downing Street says it's confident Ukrainian troops will use tanks effectively. Arctic conditions continue to sweep across the four nations of the UK today, with the Met Office warning the cold snap could last until the end of the week. A yellow warning for snow and ice is in place across parts of Northern Ireland, northwestern England and North Wales until midday tomorrow. Snow will also affect northern Scotland until Wednesday. Meanwhile, an ice warning has been issued for Cornwall and Devon in southwest England from midnight tonight until 9 o'clock in the morning. Jeremy Clarkson says he's emailed an apology to the Duke and Duchess of Sussex for saying he hated Meghan in a newspaper column. Clarkson posted a statement on his Instagram account saying he emailed the couple on Christmas Day to say his language had been disgraceful and he was profoundly sorry. His comment sparked a backlash, with more than 20,000 people complaining and making their complaints to the press regulator. The O2 Academy in Brixton has had its licence suspended for another 3 months after a deadly crowd crush last month. Lambeth Council says no licensable activities can take place during the period. Its decision comes after 2 people died in a crowd surge when ticketless fans tried to enter a gig in December. A third person remains critically ill. Downing Street is urging teachers not to strike and inflict what it's calling substantial damage to children's education. The plea comes as a result of ballots for strikes by 2 teaching unions due to be announced today. Elsewhere, teachers in Scotland are beginning their 16 days of rolling strike action in an ongoing dispute over pay. Police in England and Wales could be given powers to intervene in protests before they become too disruptive. Parliament today is going to be debating the amendment to the Public Order Bill, which would allow police to shut down demonstrations before they cause disruption. If passed, it would make it easier for officers to stop demonstrators blocking roads, for example. Human rights group Liberty says the plan is an attack on the right to protest. But Policing Minister Chris Phillips says the police should have the right to intervene when it impacts on people's lives.
Of course we, as a government, fully respect the right to protest, but that does need to be properly balanced with the right of the general public to go about their day-to-day lives. And where some of these protesters have been deliberately trying to ruin the lives of their fellow citizens, we think that is not acceptable. But it's possible to protest while at the same time allowing ordinary citizens to go about their daily lives.
You're up to date on GB News. More news in half an hour. Back to Nana. I'm not sure what she called me there, but if you just join me, it's coming up to 7 minutes after 4 o'clock. I'm Nana Akweer. I'm in for Patrick Christy. Now, police could be given more powers to close down protests before they cause serious disruption, and that is under new plans from the government. Now, the proposed amendment, will aim to allow the police to crack down on a disruptive minority who use tactics such as slow marching and also blocking roads. And this would allow officers to have more flexibility over how they can intervene.
But the bill is likely to provoke strong opposition from some peers who've been critical of previous attempts to increase police powers. It also sparked outrage from some civil liberties campaigners who fear that the government's approach is an attack on people's rights to protest. Joining me now is animal rebellion activist Orla Coughlin. I hope I said that right, Orla. Orla, OK, talk to me. What difference would this legislation make to your protests?
Thanks so much for having me, Nana. What I think the issue with this legislation is that it's so vast and it's so broad that it affects everybody who's interested in protesting, everybody who's been to a protest before, and that's the key issue. The legislation says that it would be targeting, groups that are more extreme. They said they would be targeting protests that are too disruptive, but that's really in question at the moment, that we don't know what too disruptive is and how can they possibly police what that is.
Well, actually, they've been quite specific because they've sort of talked about criminalising disruption caused by tunnelling. So, as we know, some of the activists have made little tunnels and things like that. So they've been very specific, surely, and that doesn't affect sort of normal, sort of non-disruptive protests. I mean, making a tunnel is not, is something that is specific in that bill.
So some of the things have been specific, but the other half of the bill is incredibly unspecific. So, things like, if I were to have a protest in Parliament Square and there was a big group of people in Parliament Square, and if the police at any point thought that the road might be blocked, then they would be able to arrest everybody in Parliament Square. And so it's this broad, sweeping rulings that really leave almost an impossibility for general public to engage in protest without the risk of criminalisation.
But surely if you're in that square and you're not really doing anything wrong, you wouldn't be worried about that. I mean, I hear you there because obviously it's down to the discretion as to whether they suspect that you're going to protest or not. But if you are intending to protest, and it's quite obvious if people are, they'll have banners and all sorts of placards and things, surely the police actually probably now have the right to stop you. This is just being very specific and actually giving them the confidence to do so.
Well, Nana, as you and I and all your viewers know, that protesting is a fundamental human right. And so simply being in Parliament Square with banners is completely not illegal. And then giving the police the powers to then arrest people on the pretense that they may go and do something that's, it's a hypothesis. You can't, I'm not saying this on behalf of climate protests or any organisation, but as the British public in general need to be incredibly concerned about this. We're talking about not just the climate protests, but the anti-lockdown protests, that some of your viewers may have been in favour in. We're talking about the vigils for Sarah Everard. If there's a river in your locality that is, being filled with waste, you may not be able to go out and protest against that for fear that, you could be arrested for even, considering having a march on the street.
Yeah, I hear you, but ultimately the right to peaceful protest hasn't been taken away, so people can still peacefully protest. What about incidents where people lying on the motorway and stopping ambulances and things like that from getting through? This is partly why this is here. Surely you must agree that this is a good thing for things like that.
Well, Rishi Sunak has said that these new implementations are going to be, I suppose, brought into place to combat protests such as Just Stop Oil, such as Animal Rebellion. But I don't think that an escalation in law is going to result in people not taking direct action, not protesting. We know already that there are, I think, 15 people in prison at the moment for climate protest. We know that we have laws at the moment that are perfectly capable of charging and prosecuting people who are engaged in protest. We've had hundreds of arrests, hundreds of convictions, and protests are still continuing because people are afraid for their human rights and for their futures. So I don't think any escalation in severity of criminalisation is going to result in less protesting.
Well, perhaps they're going to do this and then see if it does, because I've got to admit that I find it very irritating if I'm trying to get somewhere and there's somebody on a motorway gantry stopping all the traffic and causing me disruption, when actually ultimately I probably would agree with part of their cause. I just don't agree with the way they're doing it, and it's costing me time, money and that sort of thing. So this is what this is meant to address. Now, I get what you're saying, that other people could be caught in the crossfire because of this, but the reason they're putting this legislation is because the protests have become so extreme, and that's the issue, really, surely.
Well, with the difficulty with bringing out laws like this is we often see the government, bring these laws forward but they are never able to retract them, or very rarely do you see laws that have been brought out being taken back. And I think, this is my opinion, that the government are really afraid at the moment. They're afraid of the unions. That's why they're cracking down on unions. They're afraid of public protest, people standing up for their human rights, because they know that there's a massive power when people come together as a collective. And this is a government that, for the last 12 years have been ignoring the people. And we're in a cost of living crisis at the moment. Our NHS is on its knees, and we're facing a climate and ecological catastrophe. And people are waking up and they're coming together, and the government are really afraid.
Well, I mean, I hear you. Something does need to be done with regard to strikes, but I don't think that those can go in the same bag as these protests. But I do hear what you're saying. But ultimately, the people don't want to be disrupted constantly on a daily basis for a cause that most of us would agree with, but we just don't. A lot of people don't agree with the tactics. Orla Coughlin, thank you very much for talking to me. She's from Animal Rebellion. She's an activist. Right, well, let's move on, because this afternoon I'm asking, should there be limits on people's rights to protest? Well, GBNews is the People's Channel, and this show is nothing without you and your views at home. So to give their opinion, I'm joined by some GBNews voices, Julie Shaw and Lee Webb. Right, so I'm going to start with you, Julie. All right, Julie, what do you think about this? I mean, the government aren't removing the right to protest, but they're just putting actual specifics on it.
Yeah, but I just think that this is another step towards quelling the right to speak freely. I mean, I'm an author, and the things I write about, the vernacular I use, where's it going to end? Are we going to be shut up next? I mean, how about the government pass some bills about the injustices or the environmental issues that these protesters are banging on about, rather than just seek to shut them up? They're going to be able to pick and choose who they shut up and who they leave alone. Will Rishi Sunak ban all the speakers down at Hyde Park in Speaker's Corner? I mean, I've heard some horrible hate speech spouted off down there. Nobody does a thing. There's a big difference between free speech and incitement. I think ban that, leave the protesters to argue for what the government won't.
Yeah, it's tricky, isn't it? Because I'm sort of caught in the middle of this one, because I kind of agree that something needs to be done about this sort of protest, but I'm not sure that more legislation is the thing. Lee, what do you think? Lee Webb?
I've been on both sides of a protest because I've been on the bad side of the protests in Northern Ireland as a soldier, so I know how violent the protests can get. But also, I believe that we should keep that fundamental right to protest, and there are already laws to deal with some of these protesters. When you start spraying paint over buildings, that's criminal damage. In the middle of a motorway, when you're in the middle of a motorway, you can be prosecuted for sort of blocking that highway. So there are already laws there. I've been on a protest. My first one was about sort of a year ago for the anti-lockdown protests, because I was against lockdown, and and that was all well and good. And I think there was a few people that caused a bit of disruption after they were quite violent, and that's fair enough. They should be arrested. So I feel that there's already enough laws to deal with any kind of disruption from protests, and there doesn't really need to be any more.
Do you think that more of the problem is the fact that the police don't appear to understand whereabout what their powers are? Because it seems to me that they don't appear to realise that they have the power to stop a protest in any case. I mean, I don't see why they're not doing it. What do you think of that, Julie? I mean, they do appear to have the laws already in place.
There are lots of public order laws, and they can do that whenever they like. If anyone, like the young man said, somebody disrupting a protest and behaving violently, they can be arrested. There's no need to disrupt the whole protest and stop the issues. I mean, yeah, these guys on the motorway, that's just ridiculous, and they should be arrested. And there are stuff in place, and the police should know this. Otherwise, why are they policemen?
Go to Italy or somewhere like that and people glue themselves to the road. I've seen things on the internet where the police just rip them off there and their hands go, they're like, ah! Obviously in this country I wouldn't say that we should be doing that, but I don't really see that the police need extra laws. I don't think, that's just my personal view, but I understand why they're doing it. Lee, can you understand why they are doing this though?
I don't think, like I said, I don't think they should have extra powers. I think we need our police to be a bit more robust when they turn violent and when they really actually disrupt people. You can't have marches up on motorways, for example. When I done my lockdown march, that was in November time. It was around the streets of London. Yes, there would have been disruption, but to a certain point, that's the whole point of protesting, that you do cause a little bit of disruption. However, not going around marching on motorways, which is endangering your life and endangering the life of motorists as well. So you've got to be aware of where you're carrying out that protest. But I just feel that there is enough laws to deal with protests at the present, and whether they turn violent or whether they're in silly places.
I suppose with this one, they could probably stop you from leaving your house. Then that's the thing, isn't it? If you come out with a protest sign. Thank you very much, Lee Webb. Yeah, and Julie Shaw, lovely to talk to you. Those are my great British voices, and lots of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts as well on plans to crack down on protests. Rob says, I think most informed people are dumbfounded as to why the current law hasn't been satisfactory to deal with the disruptive protests. I can't help feeling the police have been told to let the protests aggravate people, so it makes it look like more strict laws are needed. No, I think it's an interesting point there. They do appear to have laws that they don't seem to be using. James says the government needs to bring in stricter laws to help tackle these disruptive eco-warriors. They do more harm than good, and I feel they lost the public support months ago. True, but then remember, normal people who aren't doing this sort of thing could be caught in the crossfire with these laws. But Susie says everyone should have the right to protest. They say that they are out to target Just Stop Oil. But what if the government disagrees with other demonstrators who don't necessarily align with their views? What will be next? Good question. Good question. What is next is we're on the way to a break. Here with me, I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News. Coming up, a big boost to the UK job market as the retail giant Marks & Spencer's is set to open 20 new stores in locations across the UK. They'll be creating thousands of new jobs. News is on the way. I'll be bringing you more as a serving Met police officer pleaded guilty to a series of rapes over an 18-year period. All of that after the weather.
Hi there, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. The cold weather stays with us both overnight and through the next few days, with frosty conditions expected widely, and for some, snow and ice. Although the snow and ice won't affect everyone, the wintry precipitation is coming in the form of showers on a northerly wind, those showers forming over relatively warm seas compared with the air, and so quite a number of showers coming into the north and into the west as well overnight. Primarily northern Scotland, Northern Ireland, northwest England, North Wales and parts of Cornwall seeing a mixture of rain, sleet and snow. Most of the snow in the southwest affecting hills, but for Northern Ireland, for northwest Scotland, that snow coming down to lower levels. So further significant accumulations, icy patches first thing, could be tricky on the roads during Tuesday morning. And certainly where we avoid the showers, it's going to be a cold one. Temperatures widely below freezing and some spots well below freezing. But although it will be cold, plenty of bright weather out there first thing Tuesday. For the vast majority, actually, it's not going to be snowing. It's going to be sunny for the south and the east in particular. Further showers coming into the north and the northwest. And it's going to be cold wherever you are. Temperatures at around 2 to 4 Celsius up and down the country, and below that over Northern Hills. Northern Hills seeing the most significant snow accumulations, but some more persistent snow coming in at lower levels in the far north of Scotland during Tuesday night. Although I think for the Northern Isles, for the far north mainland Scotland, it will be a mixture of rain and sleet at lower levels, but that's accompanied by a strong wind. In fact, gales developing in the north of Scotland, so blizzards and drifting snow, particularly over the hills of Aberdeenshire, Caithness and Sutherland. And then that system comes southwards as we start off Wednesday. Another frosty start across the country. Further showers of sleet and snow coming into Northern Ireland, Wales, southwest England and northern Scotland. Once again seeing the lion's share of snow on Wednesday and into Thursday. Thursday sees the showers increasingly affecting eastern areas. Western areas seeing drier and brighter weather.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you.
GB News will always stay honest,
balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance.
Now we're here to represent you.
Britain's watching. Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless, and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Just coming up to 25 minutes after 4 o'clock. If you just joined me, welcome on board. I'm Nana Akwe. I'm in for Patrick. This is GB News. Now, retail giant M&S are set to become even bigger. They're going to open 20 more stores in locations across this country in the next financial year, creating around about 3,500 jobs. And after 2 months of falling house prices in the UK, they've unexpectedly gone up this month, with Rightmove reporting apparently doubling their inquiries for prospective buyers. Joining me now is our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, with On the Money. Right, so Liam, let's talk about it. Marks and Spencer's, I think they're great. They're getting bigger, but they were getting smaller a little while ago.
Yeah, picking up the conversation from the last hour, Nana, we reported that M&S have said this morning they're going to launch 20 new stores over the next couple of years, including in Birmingham, Manchester, Leeds and Liverpool. These are both full-line stores with all the clothes and everything, and food stores. By the end of 25, M&S say, this iconic 139-year-old retail brand, they'll have 180 full-line stores across the UK and 420 food stores. But just sort of pulling the telescope out a bit, I think this points to the fact that you're right. Back in October, M&S did say that they were closing down 67 stores. But, you know, stores open and close all the time in a huge retail empire, depending on local conditions. And this has to be good news, not just the jobs, but what it says about one of our major retailers with, you know, retailing employing 1 in 10 people in this country, being a big part of our economy. They can clearly see some kind of light at the end of the tunnel. It's something a theme I've been trying to develop here on GB News over recent weeks. I look at the data very closely. We had a GDP number last week, gross domestic product, that was actually positive when a poll of almost all global economists said that UK economy would contract in November. It actually turned out it grew, only by a little bit, by 0.1%.
But they were wrong.
At the moment, you've got to take your good news where you can get it. And I would put this announcement from M&S in that same bucket of not bad, maybe even quite good news on the economy after months of doom and gloom.
Well, they've done well, haven't they? They've kind of reshaped their brand when it was sort of failing, and they've sort of re-emerged. And they've been clever. They've invested in their food sector, which is obviously a real high point
also,
for them.
Mark, M&S clothes, particularly women's clothes, they go in waves, don't they? Sometimes they're really on point, and everyone's like, wow, where'd you get that M&S? Gosh, that is fantastic. And then sometimes their clothes seem to be a little bit behind the curve. They seem to be entering a sweet spot, at least what I hear from my female family and friends and colleagues. They seem to be on and up. And again, I think this is some decent economic news. Another thing I'd say about what's going on the high street and for consumers in general, Nana, is I was very early in British broadcasting to call high inflation when my On the Money show started in September 2021, just a few months after GB News launched.
Yeah.
My first episode was high inflation is back and here's why. And at the time, the Bank of England was saying, oh, don't worry, this inflation will be transitory, it'll be coming down soon. In the end, we had double-digit inflation, as some of us predicted. So I'm now saying, and I wrote a column about it at the weekend in the Telegraph, I actually think inflation is going to start coming down quite quickly now. We've got a number coming out on Wednesday. We've got the December inflation number coming out on Wednesday. The November number was 10.7, down from 11.1 in October, the month before. I talk to people in business. Cost pressures in the supply chain, they're still there. The cost of inputs that firms need to make the goods and services that they give us, sell on to us. But those cost pressures are easing. Around the world, shipping lines are finally starting to get back into gear after the trauma, frankly, of global lockdowns. Those supply chain knots and pressures are starting to ease a little bit. Energy prices are coming down.
Petrol
prices are starting
under
to come
$1.50
down.
a litre now. Yeah.
And so we could soon start to get into a virtuous circle, just as we had a vicious circle before of inflation. I'm not saying it's over. I'm not saying inflation is going to be anywhere near the Bank of England's 2% target by the end of the year. The latest number, as I said, is 10.7. But when Rishi Sunak said rather cutely, rather cleverly for a politician in his first speech of the new year earlier this month, he said, oh, I'm going to halve inflation by the end of the year, so from 10.7 to about 5.5. I think that's nailed on. I don't think that's an ambition. I think that's almost a certainty. The only possible fly in that particular ointment, I think, or a major one that could happen, is if you have another, I don't want this to happen, but another big escalation in conflict between Russia and Ukraine, and then a spike, an alarm spike up in global oil and gas prices. But if we can avoid that, if we can carry on the way we are, I do think that a lot of this economic doom and gloom, what we're going to see from the first 3 months of the year, possibly the first 6 months of the year, I do think that by the spring, summer, the economic news is going to look a lot better.
Well, it'll put a lot of wind out of the sails of some of those strikes because they're asking for double-digit rises.
Exactly
and if
right.
inflation is coming down as it is, then...
And you're exactly right. Now, that inflation number on Wednesday will be a big part of the political puzzle that we're trying to solve when it comes to industrial relations and ending some of these strikes.
Now, positive news on the house front as well.
Well, positive if you own a house, because
I suppose so.
if you're trying to get on the housing ladder, you're wondering if your kid's ever going to be able to buy a house. You're a student watching this, wondering if you're ever going to be able to buy a house. They're not so positive. So house prices have been coming down since October, gradually. Rightmove, which is an estate agency, asking price, they deal in asking prices. They say the average asking price in January was £362,438, a huge amount of money in some parts of the country. Wouldn't buy you, a matchbox in other parts of the country. But that's a national figure. They don't give a regional breakdown. And that 362 odd grand, that is £3,300 roughly higher than it was in January 2022. So house prices, at least for now, asking prices in January are slightly up. But I think it is, as you say, Nana, that was because inquiries have gone up because Christmas is over.
Well, Liam Halligan, thank you very much for joining me. Lovely to talk to you. That's Liam Halligan. He's on the money. You're with me. I'm Nana Akwe. This is GB News on the way after the news. Number 10 says the actions of the serving Met police officer who's admitted 49 offences, including 24 counts of rape over an 18-year period, are appalling. PC David Carrick appeared at Southwark Crown Court earlier. We'll bring you the latest. And a Conservative think tank has suggested that people that have recently been made redundant should get up to 80% of their salary whilst they look for a new job. I'll ask, do you think that is fair? But first, let's get your latest news headlines.
Nana, thank you. The headlines this hour. The Foreign Office has confirmed a British man is among one of the passengers killed in the plane crash in Nepal. Officials say the black box and cockpit voice recorder have now been recovered from the plane, which crashed in Nepal, killing at least 68. The Foreign Office says they're in contact with the local authorities and they are supporting the man's family. It's the worst plane crash in Nepal for 30 years. The Home Secretary has been urged to hold an inquiry into how serial sex offender David Carrick was able to serve as a police officer. Suella Braverman has received a letter from Baroness Casey, who's conducting a Metropolitan Police Standards Review, calling for a full investigation. Serving Officer Carrick has pleaded guilty to 49 offences, including relating to 12 women, including 24 counts of rape over a 17-year period. Ms Braverman says police standards must change.
Well, it's clear that today is a sobering day for the Metropolitan Police Service and indeed for the whole policing family throughout the country. This appalling incident represents a breach of trust. It will affect people's confidence in the police, and it's clear that standards and culture need to change in policing. And that's why I'm driving forward changes to support the police and to support chief constables around the country in doing so.
The government's plans to send asylum seekers to Rwanda is to be challenged at the Court of Appeal. That's after the High Court granted an appeal against its own ruling last month that said the scheme was lawful. However, campaigners say it's a cruel policy that will cause great human suffering. No date has been yet set for the hearing. The O2 Academy Brixton has had its licence suspended for another 3 months after a deadly crush last month. Lambeth Council's decision comes following the death of 2 people who died when ticketless fans tried to enter the venue. 23-year-old security guard Gabby Hutchinson and 33-year-old Rebecca Ikumelo were killed in the incident. And Jeremy Clarkson says he's emailed an apology to the Duke and Duchess of Sussex for saying he hated Meghan in a newspaper column. Clarkson posted a statement on his Instagram account saying he emailed the couple on Christmas Day to say his language had been disgraceful and that he was profoundly sorry. His comments sparked a backlash, with around 25,000 complaints being made to the press regulator. Those are your headlines. You're up to date on TV, online and DAB+ radio. You're with GB News.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Good afternoon. It's just coming up to 38 minutes after 4 o'clock. This is GB News. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akweer. Now, the Home Secretary has been urged to launch an inquiry into how serial sex offender David Carrick was able to serve as a Metropolitan Police officer. Now, this comes as he admitted 49 offences against 12 women, including 24 counts of rape over a 17-year period. And he's due to be sentenced early next month. Now, earlier, Barbara Gray, Assistant Commissioner of the Met Police, said that Carrick's offending was unprecedented and commended the outstanding bravery of his victims. Labour Shadow Secretary Yvette Cooper said that the case demonstrated appalling failures in the police vetting.
This man was a serial rapist who's committed devastating crimes against women. It's tribute to their bravery that he's been caught, but he should never have been a police officer. He should never have been allowed to serve for so long. After the appalling murder of Sarah Everard, the government promised us change, yet that has totally failed. There have been no national standards on vetting or conduct introduced, and women have been badly let down. We have to have fundamental change.
Well, joining me now is Kevin Hurley, who's a former Detective Chief Superintendent in the Met Police. Kevin, thank you for joining me. How on earth... I want to tell them to just... tell them on GB News.
Yeah, sorry. Someone's called you just when you're coming live, aren't they? I'm trying to kill it for you. Sorry.
Thank you, Kevin.
No.
We'll sort that out. All right, Kevin.
Sorry.
So how on earth was this person first? Because as I hear, he was somebody who should never have been employed in the first place. How would somebody have like this slip the net?
Well, to be honest with you, they've all got it wrong. They're all grandstanding and showing off. You don't need an inquiry here. Answers are quite simple. What's happened? This is just like, why did Jimmy Savile happen? John Warboys, the taxi cab rapist, happened. Wayne Couzens, Stephen Port, the man who murdered 4 people in East London. How did they all happen? 2 reasons. One, there is no joined up national police IT system for crime reporting and intelligence analysis. And the second one is the whole way in which police operate now. The old values and standards cultures have gone, in that officers who will take, shall we say, a report from someone that's alleging they've been harassed or whatever, they don't investigate, they report it. Then it's essentially written off because it can't be solved. At the same time, detective inspectors, if you like, see themselves now as figures managers as opposed to managers of people who need to be nosy. With this particular case, if when we've made some of these initial allegations were coming up from various women, and some of them were quite, I won't say minor, but they were not as bad as some of the stuff we've seen. Harassment stuff in Hampshire, other stuff in Hertfordshire. If there'd been a national system and an individual constable who turned up and took the harassment report, had then put his name into a national system that had come up with, this guy Carrick is known in 4 different places for these types of offences, unless they were a complete donkey, they would have thought, oh, there's something here, I need to look at this. In the same way with Jimmy Savile, everyone around the country knew there were things happening, but they weren't joined up. So the issue here is that the Home Office, the various Home Secretaries, have failed to create a national police intelligence management and crime management database in the first case. And in the second point, because of the way the police have now, if you like, responded to the overwhelming numbers of calls, they've ended up with constables on the street seeing themselves as just responders and recorders of offences instead of doing basic investigation, coupled with the fact there are totally inadequate numbers of detectives to follow up on that. So, for example, Wayne Couzens should have been found earlier because the first constable should have been able to go on the IT system and say, there's a similar linked incident in Kent several years ago. Similarly, the guy, Stephen Port, the 4 times murderer, should have been caught earlier because investigators should have seen there were links to other matters. Jimmy Savile should have been caught earlier. This particular offender, Carrick, is a serial monster. He happens to be a police officer, but it's got nothing to do with police vetting systems. It wouldn't have mattered how much you vet someone. You're not going to find out they're a coercive, controlling, psychopathic rapist. What you need is because you don't ask questions on vetting systems. Is this person known as a rapist or whatever?
Yeah, but
all of this offending occurred. After he joined the police. There is no linkage across to the fact that Couzens got in. The point here, the police vetting system is far more intensive than virtually any other job in the country. It's not as good as it should be, and it's dropped off significantly. But be in no doubt that the references and the checks that are done on someone joining the police are far greater than they would have been, for example, someone joining the health service, GB News, or education.
But you would
the problem
expect that,
is
right?
not that.
But you would expect that. You would expect that the vetting, someone who's going to be a serving officer, would be better than any other vetting because they are going to be, they are the whole.
And they are.
But what are the procedures?
And they are.
But what are the procedures?
Well,
then?
the issue. I go back to my point that this guy offended across several police force areas, which are not network linked, so that when you put in, for example, if Kevin Hurley, me, is involved in a harassment of a woman offence in Hampshire, involved in a molesting a woman offence in London, has had a previous allegation against me of indecent assault in Hertfordshire or Bedfordshire, there should be a system where my name springs out in lights. Hey, this guy's popped up 4 times.
Yeah, but why would you?
Unless you are thick.
But Kevin, why would you have to pop up 4 times? Surely, if you just popped up once, that would be enough. I mean, I hear you that you're saying it's disjointed. It's absolutely true. They need to.
My point is, if you pop up once, it's looked at not looked at in the round. It's looked at individually. So if some person alleges that I've been following them or harassing them, what would happen is police will initially serve a warning notice on me, and that will be the end of it, because that's the process of what happens. If it goes on, you'll get more. But if in the same time I'm doing it to another woman in another county, and if I've been arrested but not prosecuted for indecent assault in another county, and I've been arrested but not prosecuted for flashing in another county, it's not linked up.
Yeah,
however,
but Kevin,
this is my point.
Yeah, but I just want to make this point that he did actually pass vetting procedures to join the Met in 2001, and this was despite allegations of malicious communications and burglary against an ex-partner the previous year. So before he joined the force, these allegations were there. So just so you know, you said the vetting is better than GB News, it's better than this, it's better than that. It doesn't appear to be, because he's already had allegations against him, and they didn't seem to notice that.
What false area were they in? What false area were those allegations made in?
Well, I mean, I'll try and get some more detail, but this is from.
Finish. In 2001, they didn't have the same kind of IT systems that they've got now, which are totally inadequate. You're talking 22 years ago. So the whole issue is all about inadequate IT. Things are not picked up unless there's joined up network IT. You're correct. Yes, maybe that should have been picked up in the past. Yeah. But if it's in another false area when it happened, then it won't have been picked up, because, of course, it's not a criminal record. So why would if you want to be a policeman, shall we say, or policewoman, shall we say, in Devon and Cornwall, would police go through the mechanisms of searching the database for the Isle of Man police?
Well, but when you're employed,
yeah,
but when you're employed as a police officer, they'll go through every single database. I should imagine, as you said, the vetting is second to none. In your words, you said it was better than anything else. So if that's the case, then yeah, but how
you're missing my point.
You're
missing my point.
I see your point that they're not linked. But the point is that if you're vetting, you don't just vet in an area that someone is in. You would do a proper full vetting all over, wouldn't you? If I went to join the police force, I'd expect them to check to see if I haven't committed an offence anywhere in the UK, not just in this little area of Devon or Cornwall or wherever I'm going. I would expect it to be as good as you say it is. Even if even coming to GB News, they would vet me to make sure that I hadn't done something anywhere, not just in London.
Can I answer? Of course, yes, if you've been convicted of a criminal offence, or cautioned for a criminal offence, then you have a criminal record. So you will, of course, pop up, and you will not get in the police if it's a significant a matter. So you won't pop up. But if we're saying, has someone ever been involved in a domestic violence incident in the Isle of Jersey, the Isle of Man, Belfast, or somewhere, it will not go on the Central Criminal Records Office and record, but would be recorded on an intelligence system in the states of Jersey Police or Devon and Cornwall Police. Well, of course, no one in the world is going to sit down and go through the 50 different police forces in the UK's databases. It doesn't happen because it's not realistic. The point I'm...
Well, that's the problem.
That's what I just... Is that not how I started? I started by saying that the intelligence databases... I started by saying that the intelligence databases in the country are not cohesive. And I can tell you, I've personally been present when I was an elected police and crime commissioner with a Conservative police minister when the head of the National Police Chiefs Council, Sarah Thornton, said to him, we need you to direct that we will have one national intelligence database and one national crime reporting database, so we don't have all of these. I mean, it's simple. You know, I'm not being difficult.
Kevin, we're running out of time. But thank you so much, though, and very insightful to hear from you as well. And you'd think they would actually have that. I assume that they did. Kevin Hurley, thank you very much. He's a former Detective Chief Superintendent of the Metropolitan Police. Right, well, let's move on because it's just coming up to 48 minutes after 4 o'clock. Another shocking story. A 7-year-old girl remains in a critical condition following a shooting in North London over the weekend, which left 6 people injured. Now, a man has been arrested on suspicion of attempted murder in connection with what is believed to be a drive-by shooting outside a Catholic church near Euston Station. For the latest, we can go to our reporter, Theo Chakumba, who is at Euston for our... Now, Theo, what's the response to this event been like?
Yes, the Metropolitan Police have said this is an attack on the community which has been going through it for the last few days, and they're having conversations later this week with members who live in and around this community. We understand on Saturday there was a memorial taking place here. Sarah Sanchez, 20-year-old, who died from leukemia, and her mother, who also died in the same month. Now, this afternoon we've heard from the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, and this is what she had to say.
I'm deeply concerned by the incident near Euston Station over the weekend, and my sympathies and condolences are with the families of the victims and those who have been affected. There's a live police investigation ongoing right now, and we know that an individual has been arrested, and I support the police in carrying out their full investigations so that we can get to the bottom of what happened.
And during that incident, we understand that 6 people were injured. We understand 4 women, including a 48-year-old woman, has sustained potentially life-changing injuries. And we also understand 2 children. A 12-year-old girl sustained a leg injury. She was treated at a hospital in central London, but was discharged yesterday afternoon, and it's expected that she will be able to recover. And we understand a 7-year-old girl is also at the moment in hospital with a serious but stable condition. So later on this week, we understand the police in this area will be meeting with members of the community to speak about what's happened this week, but of course the safety in this area. The Met Police have also said that they arrested a 22-year-old man in Barnet towards the northwest of here, about 6 miles, and he's been arrested on suspicion of attempted murder in connection with the Euston shooting. So, of course, the community here are still coming to grips with what's happened here in the last few days.
Theo Chakumba, thank you very much. We're moving on to another story now with regards to a Conservative think tank that suggested that people that have recently been made redundant should get up to 80% of their salary. Bright Blue has said that the state should pay more in benefits to those laid off work who are looking for work by introducing a Euro-style insurance scheme. Now, it is a new idea which could help to drive Britain's economically inactive back to work. But would it work? Would it actually work in practice? Communications Manager at Bright Blue, Max Anderson, joins me now in the studio. Max, OK, so detail this plan to me, because I've always thought that it's quite unfair that if you're suddenly put out of work, it's difficult to get benefits.
Well, that's completely true. And actually, when you look at it, it's such a steep curve that when you find yourself unemployed, you can go to the basic level of universal credit. And for a number of people, especially middle-income households, that's quite a big change. So the way this scheme would work is it's quite simple. Is you get the choice, if you pay national insurance, you get the choice to opt into this scheme. And if you decide to opt in for a certain period of time, when you find yourself unemployed, for whatever reason, if you're having to step out of the job market, you're given for a short period of time when you find yourself unemployed, receiving a slightly higher level of support. It's kind of a bit similar to the furlough scheme, but the difference is you would only receive that support if you have paid in and contributed during your time when you're employed.
Because it seems unfair that if you've been contributing all this time, then suddenly you find yourself out of work, and if you're not made redundant, you can't immediately access the benefits. Isn't that correct? So you have to then go through some other process that could take weeks to get the money, and then you don't get very much.
Yeah, so, I mean, we also want to try and improve the accessibility. So this is like, as you say, it's fairness is the one side. We want to try and be fairer to people. And that's literally the whole point of the chapter, is fairness, and the public would agree that's the right, fair way to do it.
Yeah.
But the other side as well is we also want to improve accessibility because, as you say, it can sometimes be very hard. And this is where we also recommend introducing a social security digital platform or welfare system, if depending which terminology you prefer to use. And that should also help make it easier and highlight where you can find support. So when you find yourself unemployed, you're not only it's not even easier to find where that support is, but it's also a little bit more than it currently is.
But then what if you've paid into this, you never actually ever take it out? What does it accrue? What happens?
Well, we've kind of come up with a few ideas, but we've kept it very, very broad in the suggestions, not as finite as in other areas. One possible area that the government could explore, that when you retire, if you've been doing it all this time, maybe in retirement you see a little bit of it come back. But at the moment, we've kept that fairly open. Maybe further down the line, we'll look more into that. But for the moment, we think this is a great idea to ensure that people, when they're unemployed, get a little bit more support, but it also helps them get back into employment. We find when people in countries where the curve is really, really steep, they find it much harder to get back into employment, or they're being forced into sectors that might not be right for them, and that's not something we want to see. We want people to go into the right jobs where they can be the most productive, help this country drive forward. That's where we want them to.
But it couldn't be sort of interminable, like it couldn't be just carrying on and on, you get 80%. How long would you get it for? And how much would you have had to put in before you would get that money?
So again, we try to keep it a little bit open on this. This is for the government to decide when it's right. It's just the contributory scheme we want to be introduced. It wouldn't be forever, that's the first thing. It would be a short period of time, so it could be 3 months, 6 months, but it would just be for that short time. It can't continue forever, of course. Government's pockets are not never-ending. So that's where we'd recommend it, just be a short period of time.
Well, so let's just throw something into your scenario. So what if I have been working for about 3 months somewhere? I've paid in this special contribution. I suddenly lose my job. Do I still qualify, and would I still get the money? Or would I only get what I put in?
You probably get, well, again, this is how the government... There is a number of ways that this could be done. It could be done that, depending how much you contributed, you will then see more support. That's one way to do it. Maybe that there's literally just a set level that everyone will can opt in the same, and then they'll get the same out. There's also possibility that you have to contribute for 3 years or be part of the employment system before then you can opt in. There's a number of scenarios that this could be played out, but obviously we understand that there's concern around there. We don't want people taking advantage of it, for example, only being in for a week, contributing 1 week, and then seeing that level of support offered. So there are possible ways to mitigate for those problems. But at the end of the day, this is a really fantastic opportunity to help so many people, especially middle-income households. They'll be really well protected by this, and help support them and make sure when they're unemployed, they're helped.
Do you think the government will actually look at this? I mean, you know, is it something that they might do? I mean, you're a Conservative think tank. Have they asked you to do this, and is it something that they might? Yeah, well,
we're always talking with government and always giving them ideas. They've in the past adopted a huge amount of our policies, and to be honest, it seems...
Give us one of the ones that they've had of yours.
Oh, God, you're really testing me now.
You said a huge amount, so this must be bringing out of your head.
Well, for example, the net zero agenda is one of ours.
Oh, God, you want to admit that? You've actually got to admit, get out, seriously.
Yeah, that was one of ours
that's
back
one
in
of yours, you're guilty of that?
We are unfortunately guilty of that.
Do you think that was a good one? Do you still...
I still think it's a good way to go. But obviously I know there are people who have mixed feelings on it, but that was certainly one of ours back in the day.
I think it's almost everyone else. This is Max Anderson. Thank you very much for talking to me and confessing that you came up with net zero. He's the communications manager of Bright Blue. Well, lots of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts on the proposed amendments to the Public Order Bill, which aims to make it easier for police to break disruptive protests. Phil says, look at the damage and obstruction they've caused for over the years. They need to be stopped, but why haven't we heard of the hundreds of arrests and imprisonments that the woman from Animal Rebellions is talking about? Have I missed something? Yes, I think we've both missed it. Now, Harry says, if protesters have the right to damage the lives of non-protesters, non-protesters should have the right to damage the lives of protesters. And Dave says, the right to protest may well be a human right, that you should go about your lawful business without putting people out or risking your own or other people's safety. It is the civil disobedience and malicious disruption aspects that are key here. And Jason says, fantastic news on a potential crackdown on this ridiculous behaviour by the eco-warriors. Well done to Rishi Sunak. At least he's done something well. Listen, you're with me. I'm Nana Akweer, in for Patrick Christy. Coming up in the next few minutes, we're expected to hear whether teachers will walk out on strike in dispute over pay in England and Wales. We'll bring you that live, plus more on the government's plans to give police more powers to stop disruptive protests. I'll be back in a moment.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel. Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
It is 5 o'clock. I'm Nana Akweer, in for Patrick Christys, and with you until 6 o'clock. Coming up this hour, within the next few minutes, we're expecting the Teachers' Union to announce if their members are to join the NHS workers and take strike action in a row over pay. I'll bring you that soon after the news. Meanwhile, MPs have been discussing Rishi Sunak's plan to introduce new strike laws, which would ensure a minimum of service in the public sector during walkouts. The RMT union will protest outside Downing Street this evening. Also this hour, police could be allowed to intervene before protests become highly disruptive, under new measures set to be considered in Parliament. An amendment to the Public Order Bill will aim to give police greater clarity about when they can intervene to stop demonstrators blocking roads or slow marching. Campaigners say it'll limit our right to protest. Do you agree? A Met-serving police officer has been revealed as one of Britain's most prolific sex offenders after admitting to raping a dozen women over an 18-year period. The force has apologised to victims after it emerged that allegations of sexual violence against PC David Carrick had previously been raised a number of times. We'll bring you the latest and we'll ask you whether you trust the police. Get in touch as ever, you know the cues. Email gbviews@gbnews or UK or tweet me at gbnews. Before that, let's get your latest news headlines.
Nana, thank you and good evening to you. The top stories on GB News today. The Home Secretary has been to hold an urgent inquiry into how the serial sex offender David Carrick was able to serve as a Metropolitan Police officer. Suella Braverman has received a letter from Baroness Casey, who's conducting a Metropolitan Police Standards review, calling for a full investigation. Carrick has pleaded guilty to 49 offences relating to 12 women, including 24 counts of rape over a 17-year period. Appearing at Southwark Crown Court, the serving officer admitted raping 9 of the women, some on numerous occasions. He's due to be sentenced next month. Meanwhile, Ms Braverman says police standards must change.
Well, it's clear that today is a sobering day for the Metropolitan Police Service and indeed for the whole policing family throughout the country. This appalling incident represents a breach of trust. It will affect people's confidence in the police, and it's clear that standards and culture need to change in policing. And that's why I'm driving forward changes to support the police and to support chief constables around the country in doing so.
Well, the Shadow Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, has backed Baroness Casey's call for an inquiry into Carrick's case, and she says change is needed.
This man was a serial rapist who's committed devastating crimes against women. It's tribute to their bravery that he's been caught, but he should never have been a police officer. He should never have been allowed to serve for so long. After the appalling murder of Sarah Everard, the government promised us change, yet that has totally failed. There have been no national standards on vetting or conduct introduced, and women have been badly let down. We have to have fundamental change.
The Foreign Office has confirmed a British man is among one of the passengers who died in a plane crash in Nepal. Officials say the black box and the cockpit voice recorder have now been recovered from the plane which crashed in Nepal, killing at least 68 people. The Foreign Office says they're in contact with local authorities and they're supporting the man's family. It's Nepal's worst plane crash in 30 years. The government's plans to send asylum seekers to Rwanda is to be challenged in the Court of Appeal. That's after the High Court granted an appeal against its own ruling last month that said the scheme was lawful. However, campaigners are still saying it's a cruel policy that will cause great human suffering. No date has been yet set for the hearing at the Court of Appeal. The Foreign Secretary has said he's been sanctioned by the Russian government. In a tweet, James Cleverly said he was happy to be sanctioned if it was the price for supporting Ukrainian freedom. Earlier today, Russia also claimed that British tanks will burn on the battlefields. But Downing Street says it's confident Ukrainian troops will use the tanks effectively. Police in England and Wales could be given powers to intervene in protests before they become too disruptive. Parliament today has been debating an amendment to the Public Order Bill, which would allow police to shut down demonstrations before they're too disruptive. If it's passed, it could make it easier for officers to stop demonstrators blocking roads, for example. Human rights group Liberty says the plan is an attack on the right to protest, but Policing Minister Chris Philp says the police should have the right to intervene when it impacts on people's lives.
Of course we, as a government, fully respect the right to protest, but that does need to be properly balanced with the right of the general public to go about their day-to-day lives. And where some of these protesters have been deliberately trying to ruin the lives of their fellow citizens, we think that is not acceptable. But it's possible to protest while at the same time allowing ordinary citizens to go about their daily lives.
The O2 Academy Brixton has had its licence suspended for another 3 months after a deadly crowd crush at Christmas. Lambeth Council says no licensable activities can take place during the next 3 months, and its decision comes after 2 people died in a crowd surge when ticketless fans tried to enter a gig in December. A third person remains critically ill in hospital. Jeremy Clarkson says he's emailed an apology to the Duke and Duchess of Sussex for saying he hated Meghan in a newspaper column. Clarkson posted a statement online and said he's emailed the couple saying his language had been disgraceful and he was profoundly sorry. In the statement, he added ITV and Amazon, which airs Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, and the Grand Tour, respectively, were incandescent following his column. His comments sparked a backlash as well, with around 25 25,000 complaints being made to the press regulator. And some breaking news we're just receiving in about the teachers' strike. We can tell you that teachers in England and Wales have voted in favour of strikes in a dispute over pay. That means 9 out of 10 members of the National Education Union voted for strike action. The union has declared 7 days of walkouts in February and March, but it has said any individual school will only be affected for 4 of those days. And that comes despite Downing Street urging them not to strike and inflict what they called substantial damage to children's education. Elsewhere, teachers in Scotland began their 16 days of rolling strike action in an ongoing dispute over pay. Those are your latest news headlines. You're up to date on GB News. I'm back in half an hour with more.
Good afternoon, this is GB News. I'm Nana Akweer. Let's start this hour with some breaking news. Within the last few moments, it's been announced that teachers in England and Wales are set to go on strike in February and March after members of the National Education Union voted in favour of action in a dispute over pay. So teachers in England and Wales will be joining their Scottish counterparts on the picket lines, despite Downing Street urging teachers not to strike, which they said would inflict substantial damage to children's education. Well, joining me in the studio now is GB News political reporter Olivia Utley. Olivia, so they have all decided that they will strike. Was it 1 in 10 were against it? 9 in 10 were for it.
Yes, and last week or a couple of weeks ago there was a similar vote and it failed to reach the 50% threshold because the turnout was so low, but the numbers were pretty similar. So this is extremely bad news for parents and children across the UK. We know how damaging remote learning was for children during the pandemic, and the threat is that that's what's going to come back. Now, head teachers have said that they'll take all reasonable steps to keep schools open for as many pupils as possible over the striking days, and has said that any individual school will only be affected by 4 of the 7 days of strikes. But any reasonable steps is pretty vague. And the bottom line is that the government has no leverage to push teachers into going into school if they don't want to. So essentially what the government is going to do, it seems, is sort of plead with teachers to keep schools open to teach at least GCSE and A-level pupils in the lead up to their exams. Gillian Keegan, the Education Secretary, is going to meet union leaders later this week. But again, just like with the nurses, it's hard to see how there can be a breakthrough when the disparity between what they want to be paid and what they are being paid is just so big.
So what is it that they're actually asking for now? What percentage is there? Do we know how much?
They want more than 10% pay rise. They were offered a 5% pay rise last year, but they were given a 5% pay rise last year, I should say, sorry. But they say that amounts to a pay cut as inflation is around 10%. So they're asking for a more than 10% pay cut. Figure's not yet clear.
Where are the government with their sort of strike limitation bill? They're trying to sort of get people to at least give a minimum level of service.
Well, it's moved forwards a little bit. It was tabled last week, but the expectation is that it won't, if it is to get anywhere, and there's a big question mark over that because we know that there'll be plenty of MPs, the whole of Labour and quite a few Conservatives who won't support it, and then it faces problems in the Lords and in the courts as well. But even if it were to get through, we could only start to see that coming in the summer, which is far too late for these strikes, obviously. So maybe that's the long-term solution for the government, but even then, the minimum service legislation would only apply to certain sectors, and it's thought that it would only apply to sectors where lives were at risk, which this probably wouldn't fall under.
So, so how many days are they saying they're going to strike then? And is it all schools? Because it's head teachers and it's also teachers. Is it across the board now? Will there be some schools that people won't strike in?
It's 7 days of strikes. As they say, individual schools are only expected to be affected by 4 of those 7 days. There are 300,000 teachers in this union, so I don't know how they're distributed across schools, but it sounds as though almost every school will be affected.
So there'll be no level of minimum service, and basically, are they saying that they might do remote learning, or is it just that people will actually have to take their kids and... Because that's what the public will be wondering. I mean, I've got a 13-year-old in school, 14-year-old actually, in school and a 5-year-old, am I going to have to stay at home and look after them?
Well, the conversation last week was that it would be a return to remote learning, but it's not quite clear whether that would be provided. Again, head teachers have said that they would put reasonable measures in place to ensure that schools are kept open for many pupils as much as possible over these days. But without any sort of minimum service legislation in place, as you say, it's basically at the whim of individual teachers, and the government can plead if it wants to, but it might not get anywhere with that. I mean, that said, Gillian Keegan is meeting the Teachers' Union this week to discuss it. It's possible that there will be some sort of breakthrough. We know that, well, it sounds very much as though we're heading for a breakthrough on rail strikes. And on the nurses as well, it looks as though the government is going to capitulate, at least in some areas. So it is possible that these strikes end up not going ahead. But with that disparity between a 5% pay rise and the inflation plus pay rise, which teachers are asking for, I can't quite see how that gap could be closed.
Well, thank you very much, Olivia. She's GB News political reporter, Olivia Utley. We'll bring you more on that right here on GB News throughout the evening. And within the next 10 minutes, I'll be getting reaction from a maths tutor. Do not go anywhere. Right, well, lots of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts on Boris bashing. Anthony says Boris is being bashed again for taking his staff out to dinner, because we were talking about the fact that £4,000 apparently Boris spent on a dinner where he took his staff out in New York. Apparently it's £177 a head. It's not that expensive, which is exactly what I said. They're saying I was out in London recently and spent over £100 a head for the two of us with only one bottle of wine. Linda says the only reason why the Boris bashing has started again by the Labour Party and the lefties is because they fear him coming back, because they know that he'll vote. They'll vote for him. We'll vote for him. Yeah, you're probably right there. I mean, there's not really much options there. Les says, I wonder how much is spent on all these COP27 gatherings. Exactly. And most of those leaders flew there via private jet, and they dined out at some of the most expensive restaurants, all in the sort of guise of helping with climate change. Slightly hypocritical. But Janet says, how dare politicians use taxpayers' money to fund their posh lunches abroad? There are families in the UK that can't even afford to pay their gas bills. Absolutely disgusting. Well, it is a bit grim, but, you know, we pay for them full stop. Right, we'll keep your thoughts coming. In other news this afternoon, a controversial expansion of police powers could give officers the opportunity to shut down protests before they cause serious disruption. Throughout the whole of last year, various environmental campaigners, such as Just Stop Oil, targeted London with a series of protests to raise their concerns over climate change. And it's often involved activists climbing gantries on the M25. You probably got stuck there at some point, or supergluing themselves to railings, which is really foolish, or which caused huge traffic disruption and delays, with motorists stuck in queues for hours. The government wants new legislation to allow police to intervene before any demonstrations could impact people's lives, but critics say that this would undermine the right to protest. So joining me live in the studio is political commentator David Olroyd-Bolt. David, OK, this new legislation that they're putting through, a lot of people are saying that it's a bit overreach of their powers. What do you think?
I think it's right that there is overreach. And the other point is that this is yet another instance of governments making legislation where legislation already exists. If you look at the Highways Act 1980, there exists already the power for the police to remove people who are causing an obstruction to the highway. So anybody saying, well, what about people on the gantries? What about people stopping, gluing themselves to the M25 at rush hour? The legislation and the statute already exists for those people to be dealt with. I think there's a fundamental point here that there should not be the power under statute for demonstrations to be stopped before they've taken place. We have the fundamental right under British common law, and it's a right of all free-born Englishmen to protest. Now, just because you dislike the reason for these protests doesn't mean that we should have the police sent in to stop them, because what we might dislike, others might like, and to give the obverse, something which we might support. For example, during lockdowns, when there were people protesting against lockdowns and against vaccine mandates, there were plenty of people who would have liked to have seen that stopped before it took place. So I think we have to be extremely careful about powers that we give to the state, yet more power we give to the state to control our behaviour.
Well, I was under the impression that they could do what they say they're going to do anyway, but they've been very specific. So they've got down here a new offence for interfering with key national infrastructure. Well, I thought that'd be an offence anyway. They've got another one criminalising people if you're tunnelling and you're not meant to be tunnelling. But surely if you're not meant to be tunnelling, you're breaking the law anyway. I'm struggling to understand why they're being so specific, and I feel perhaps they're disguising things within that specificity.
I think what they're trying to, or what the object of this bill is to bring it all together under one piece of legislation. But I fundamentally disagree with yet more statute being added to an already overburdened statute book. Just use the existing laws properly and make sure that the police are aware of them. It's interesting, if you look at the government statement, that the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, Sir Mark Rowley, seems to be backing off already from supporting this bill wholeheartedly. For instance, he has said that in the statement that he's issued today, he's implied that he doesn't agree that protests ought to be stopped before they begin, whereas the Prime Minister's statement is very clear that he would like to see that happen. So there's already some political manoeuvring going on here between the Met and between the government. As you say, the things that exist under public order offences are already criminal offences.
You can't just decide to go through into a tunnel.
So I'm not quite sure what this is, other than yet another piece of virtue signalling from a rather insipid and managerial Prime Minister who doesn't have terribly many ideas.
I think another slightly concerning part of it, because I'm divided, because on one side I think, yes, we do need to actually enforce the law, and if the enforcement is inadequate, then yes, and perhaps the penalties need to be harsher. But I think we've got the things there, because one part of it is extending the powers to manage public assemblies. And within that, they're talking about including the power to place conditions on the noises from a public assembly and a single-person protest. And currently, these particular things, the powers are only available to Home Office forces. So they're extending the availability to the British Transport Police and the Ministry of Defence Police. So they're actually extending the remit of these powers to different elements of the police.
Well, that's fine. That's an amendment to existing legislation. But what we do not need is yet more legislation, because I don't think the police are clear enough already on the powers that they possess under, say, the Highways Act, under, say, multiple public order offences that are already there. What we really need is for the police to effect the powers that they currently possess, and not to be so, let's not to be so timid about removing people who are clearly causing a disturbance. For instance, people on rail tracks, that's trespass to begin with, which is a civil offence, not a criminal offence, but they can still be removed because they're causing a danger to their own and others' lives. If they're on the roads, they're covered by the Highways Act. If they're causing an offence, for instance, going into the National Gallery and throwing paint or eggs onto works of art, that is a public order offence. These statutes already exist. And so what the point of this is from the Home Office, from the Prime Minister, remains to be made, other than, as I said, it seems to be some kind of signalling that we do take this seriously. Well, if you take it seriously, give clear guidance from the Home Office to the Metropolitan Police about the extent that policing can be and the penalties that can be reached under civil law or under criminal law.
Do you think this is a case that basically they just need to put some money into educating the police by the sounds of it? Because it's almost as though the police don't know what their powers are.
I think you've hit the nail on the head.
That's where the money needs to go.
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head.
We've solved it.
Because there is such a proliferation of statute already, it's incredibly difficult for the average policeman, given the burden of paperwork every time he makes an arrest or every time he inquires into a case, or she, it's incredibly difficult for them to keep on top of all the powers that are available to them and the penalties that already exist. So perhaps if the police put this money into training, as you say, or the Home Office was clearer on its guidance about what the police should be doing in these instances, there would not be the need for yet more legislation.
Well, if they can't work out what the current legislation is, just giving them more homework is actually even worse.
Exactly.
Thank you very much, David.
Thank you, Nana.
Lovely to talk to you. You're with me, I'm Nana Akwe, in for Patrick Christys on GB News. Coming up, I'll get reaction from a maths teacher after the National Education Union announced teachers in England and Wales will go on strike in February and March in dispute over pay. Do not go anywhere, but let's take a look at the weather.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGibbon from the Met Office. Cold winds from the Arctic have arrived, bringing overnight a widespread frost, snow and ice for some, but also clear spells for many. The winds at the moment coming from the north and passing over, well, relatively mild seas, and as that occurs, they pick up quite a number of showers. Those showers predominantly affecting those areas exposed to the north wind, so northern Scotland, Northern Ireland, North West England, North Wales continuing to see snow showers overnight, building up at lower levels, but more significantly accumulations over the hills. There's another area of showers affecting Cornwall and parts of Devon. Here, it's rain and sleet at lower levels, snow over the hills. But either way, icy patches forming as the day on Tuesday begins with a widespread frost and temperatures well below freezing. But away from those showery areas, actually plenty of clear weather. Plenty of sunshine in the south and the east during Tuesday. Crisp winter sunshine, not a snowflake in sight. But in the north and the northwest, further sleet and snow showers coming in. And again, that snow building up over northern hills. some patchy accumulations at lower levels as well. Cold day to come, 2 to 4 Celsius, feeling even colder in the wind, which will strengthen across northern Scotland as we end Tuesday, bringing a spell of gales and more significant sleet and snow. I think rain at lower levels for Shetland, Orkney, the north of the mainland, but snow continuing to build up over the hills with blizzards in places. So treacherous conditions in the north of Scotland and further showers coming to Northern Ireland, western parts of England and Wales overnight. But a widespread frost once again as we start off Wednesday. Plenty of bright weather out there, some patchy cloud, but otherwise a fine day to come if you're in central and eastern parts of the UK. Sunny spells, further showers coming into the west and increasingly northeast England as well as eastern Scotland. Then into Thursday, the showers mainly become confined to eastern coasts. Western areas see plenty of sunshine, but it stays cold.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here. You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel. Good afternoon, 25 minutes after 5 o'clock. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. We are the People's Channel. I'm Nana Akue. Right, let's get some more on that breaking news we heard at the start of the hour. Teachers in England and Wales are set to go on strike in February and March. That is after members of the National Education Union, or the NEU, they voted in favour of action in a dispute over pay. Now, the union has declared 7 days of walkouts in February and March, but it has said that any individual school will only be affected by 4 of the days, and the first day of the strikes will be February the 1st. Let's talk to Bobby Siegel, who's a teacher and host of the Maths Appeal podcast. Bobby, what impact will this have on children? Because obviously they've already been affected by years of disruption due to COVID, and this is not great.
I understand. And the way I think about it, Nana, is I almost consider it analogous to the strikes going on in the health sector with our nurses and doctors. And of course, if you're in the health sector, the last thing you want to see is that patients are waiting on beds, incredibly long waiting lists and lines. I think the same thing in teaching, of course. When people enter the profession, they enter because they want to positively impact the lives of young people. But the reality is, over the last 12 years, we've seen massive underinvestment in education. I think the numbers in terms of teachers' pay, it's been down nearly a quarter, 24% in real terms since 2010. So it's all about trying to redress that. And what impact does this have on actual teaching and young people? Again, I'm a maths teacher, and 1 in 8 teachers 1 in 8 lessons across the country for maths is taught by a non-math specialist. And in terms of national recruitment, I think we found that recruitment is, I think there's more, 2/3 more vacancies than there was pre-pandemic. So people are choosing not to enter the teaching profession. And obviously there's multiple factors at play here, but pay is one of them. And as a teacher, the last thing we want to do is to harm students' education. But the reality is the government hasn't been discussing this issue seriously enough with the unions. So this is a measure of last resort.
Well, listen, Bobby, stay right there because we're getting more breaking news now when it comes to the teachers' strike. School leaders in Wales are set to take industrial action over pay and funding, but head teachers in England will not stage walkouts after the NHD union ballot turnout failed to meet the legal threshold. Bobby, can I get your reaction from that?
Yes, I think that, again, with unions, there are various different unions. Like today we had the NEU announce that there will be strikes going ahead. The NASUWT, they said they got 90% of people voting for strikes, but only about a 44% turnout. So they're going to reballot. And again, the head teachers union is a separate one. And again, you can think in terms of perspective. The head teachers are thinking in terms of holistically, we need to make sure that the young people are educated. But the vast majority of people in schools earning between 25 to 40,000, let's say, they are just regular teachers working day to day, maybe managing departments, but they're not senior leaders. So for them, they in particular, when you think about the cost of living crisis, the energy crisis, rising mortgage rents, etc., they've been impacted more heavily. So I can see why there's a disparity between the two. But I think it's a case of the government needs to come and have a proper discussion with teachers. I think none of the figures were, last year they offered 5% increase for existing teachers. And when you look at inflation at 9-10%, that's a 5% drop in real terms pay.
Well, I mean, look, I suppose that maybe the headmasters didn't strike because they probably get paid pretty well. But all I'm seeing here is that, look, yes, inflation, but everyone's going through what you're talking about. So we hear that. But also inflation is actually set to fall. So they've been offered 5%. If you go to most jobs, you don't just get a pay rise of 5%. And, you know, people will point to the holidays. You know, I know you might, it's not popular, but there aren't many jobs where you get like 6 weeks off. I know you might be marking and doing things, but, you know, the teachers, in many people's view, have it quite good. So why on earth are they insisting on striking?
Yeah, I understand that perspective, Nana. But if you look at the general macro picture in the UK, we have rail workers, we have doctors, we have nurses, we have barristers, various different sectors all going on strike in the past few months and in the next few months. And there has to be a common thread for this because these publicly paid workers are being underpaid and teaching is one of them. And I think in the UK, we had Mr. Sunak, the Prime Minister, come out last week or a couple of weeks ago and talk about the value of numeracy and maths education. So if the government genuinely believes that education is that silver bullet to making sure that our young workers, our adults are equipped for a 21st century Britain, they need to make sure that the people educating them are fairly paid. And again, in teachers, we're not asking, you know, to have Maseratis, Bugattis, fancy cars. They just want to be fairly paid. And if you look at our peers in, let's say, in Singapore, in Scandinavia, in Germany, teachers there are paid relatively better compared to other professions. So I think it's just a case of fairness. We're not asking for, like silver linings and gold-plated meals. It's just to have a fair sense of equality.
Well, I mean, last time I looked, I didn't think teachers were paid that badly, and to compare to other countries, I mean, if you've ever been to Singapore, the cost of living is a lot higher. I mean, my sister lived out there and everything else like that. But what about from the perspective of someone like me? I've got a daughter, she's 14. Yeah. You know, and a son who's 5. What about us parents who've been putting up with this all the time? And, like, I don't get a 5% pay rise. Other people aren't going to get even that opportunity. I think when you asked about all those people striking, most of what you're talking about were public sector workers who could hold us to ransom. Where's the money going to come from? It's going to come from the public purse. The teachers will be put in a higher income bracket and therefore pay more tax. None of it is really adding up. What would you say to the parents?
I understand it's really tough, but the way I think about it is that a lot of my friends, I'm not a parent myself, but a lot of my friends who are teachers, are parents, are uncles, are aunties, they have young people in the education system. And I said before, as a teacher, the last thing you want to do is to harm young people's education. But again, I brought that stat about, I think since the pandemic, the number of teaching vacancies are up by 2/3 compared to 2019. So clearly, young people or people changing careers are looking at the teaching profession and saying, actually, there are easy jobs out there where I don't have to deal with the headache of marking, young people, I get paid better, working conditions are probably better. So actually, if you look at that, people are voting with their feet. They're not joining the profession. So if we want people to join the profession, if we want to make sure that our young people are taught by maths teachers rather than non-specialists, we need to make sure that things are fair. And again, I think bigger picture, it is a really tough time in the country. We understand there's inflation, there's higher cost of living, and it's not an easy time. There is no easy solution.
Exactly, but Bobby, it could end up being very counterproductive because a lot of the professions, we're with labour shortage in loads of professions, not just teaching. But we hear your plea. Bobby Seagull, thank you very much for joining me. He's a teacher and host of the Maths Appeal podcast. Now, the Prime Minister's official spokesman said that we would continue to call on teachers not to strike, given we know what substantial damage was caused to children's education during the pandemic. And it's certainly not something that we want to see repeated. You're with me, I'm Nana Akwir on GB News. Coming up, the serving police officer who's admitted to being a serial rapist, attacking a dozen women over an 18-year period. Why wasn't he stopped when the Met Police had heard numerous allegations against him? I'll be joined by a former detective superintendent at the Met Police. But first, let's get your latest news headlines.
Nana, thank you. Let's bring you the headlines. Teachers in England and Wales are to go on strike in February and March in a dispute over pay. 9 out of 10 members of the National Education Union have voted for action, which will include 7 days of walkouts. That's despite Downing Street urging them not to strike and inflict what they're calling substantial damage on children's education. Teachers in Scotland also began their 16 days of rolling strike action today in an ongoing dispute over pay. The Home Secretary's been urged to hold an inquiry into how the serial sex offender David Carrick was able to serve as a police officer. Suella Braverman has received a letter from Baroness Casey, who's conducting a Metropolitan Police Standards review, calling for a full investigation. Serving Officer Carrick has pleaded guilty to 49 offences relating to 12 women, including 24 counts of rape over a 17-year period. Ms Braverman says police standards must change.
Well, it's clear that today is a sobering day for the Metropolitan Police Service and indeed for the whole policing family throughout the country. This appalling incident represents a breach of trust. It will affect people's confidence in the police, and it's clear that standards and culture need to change in policing. And that's why I'm driving forward changes to support the police and to support chief constables around the country in doing so.
The Foreign Office has confirmed a British man is among one of the passengers killed in a plane crash in Nepal. 72 people were on board the Yeti Airlines flight from the capital Kathmandu to Pokhara, with the death toll currently standing at 68. Officials say the black box and cockpit voice recorder have been recovered from the aircraft. And here the Foreign Office says they're in contact with local authorities in Nepal and meanwhile supporting the man's family. It's Nepal's worst plane crash in 30 years. The government's plans to send asylum seekers to Rwanda is to be challenged in the Court of Appeal. That's after the High Court granted an appeal against its own ruling last month that said the scheme was lawful. Campaigners are saying it's a cruel policy that will cause great human suffering. No date has yet been set for the hearing at the Court of Appeal. And Jeremy Clarkson says he's emailed an apology to the Duke and Duchess of Sussex for saying he hated Meghan in a newspaper column. Clarkson posted a statement online saying he's emailed the couple saying his language had been disgraceful and he was profoundly sorry. He added that ITV and Amazon, which airs 2 programmes he appears in, were incandescent following his column. His comments sparked backlash, with around 25,000 complaints being made to the press regulator. That's it. You're up to date on TV, online and DAB+ radio. You're with GB News and I'm back in half an hour.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest,
balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance.
Now we're here to represent you.
Britain's watching. Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless, and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon. It's just coming up to 39 minutes after 5 o'clock. If you've just joined me, welcome on board. I'm Nana Aquia. I'm in for Patrick Christy. Now, the Home Secretary is urged to launch an inquiry into how a serial sex offender was able to serve as a Met police officer. Now, it comes after David Carrick admitted 49 offences against 12 women. That includes 24 counts of rape over a 17-year period. Now, earlier, Barbara Gray, Assistant Commissioner of the Met Police, said Carrick's offending was unprecedented and commented on the outstanding bravery of his victims. He's due to be sentenced next month. So joining me on the show now is Shabnam Chowdhury, who's a former Detective Superintendent at the Metropolitan Police. Shabnam, how on earth did this guy even get the job in the first instance? I mean, I just can't fathom how he could have got through without any questions.
Do you know what? It's incomprehensible, Nana, because in 2000, he was already suspected of 2 offences. He applied for the Met and he got through in 2001 and he was vetted and he passed the vetting process despite the fact that there were 2 allegations that had already been made against him for domestic abuse by an ex-partner. Yet in 2002, 2004, 2009, 16, 17 and 19, there were other offences against him. Again, allegations made, no less than 9. He came to the notice of the Met and in 2017, he was re-vetted and then he passed the vetting process. How is that even possible? It's possible because the vetting processes in the Metropolitan Police are broken.
Well, it sounds useless. And then whilst he was there, he committed these offences, and it seems that people were aware of them, but nothing seemed to happen. I'm just at a loss to understand now why, if people are aware, this person is able to continue serving as an officer.
Well, I'm not sure that they're aware of the fact that he was a rapist and that he abused and violently abused women, but there were red flag behaviours. He had a really derogatory nickname, which I won't repeat here on live on television, but the fact is he got a derogatory nickname. He would have had those behaviours. He wouldn't necessarily have been displaying the fact that he's got rapist written on his forehead, but officers would have known of his red flag behaviours. There's a fear of speaking out in policing across the whole of the UK because officers are scared that if they speak out, they're going to be vilified, they're going to be isolated, they're going to be subject to investigation themselves, and they're going to find themselves out in the cold, and so they don't speak out. I get that because I've been there and I've experienced that myself. So the Met and policing across the UK have got a lot of work in order to protect whistleblowers within the police, and also to ensure that victims externally that report allegations against police need to be protected. The Metropolitan Police ignored these allegations. They only came to light because Hertfordshire Police finally investigated them and brought him to justice and gave the victims the justice that they deserved.
See, this is worrying because it's the confidence now that the public have in the police, in particular women. When an officer is telling you something or asking you to do things, it just, you know, for me personally, I'm going to be sort of looking again and thinking, well, you know, can I trust this individual? Am I safe in the hands of this individual? And not only that, even if I was to complain about this individual, would those around him even do anything about it?
You know what? I really desperately want females, women and girls to be able to come forward and to trust the police, but this has not helped. This has just eroded trust further. I've had phone calls today from female officers upset because they themselves are at a loss as to how this individual got away with the behaviours that he's actually got away with. Look, you know, there's the Met have put in a hotline. They've got what you call the right line for internal investigations. They've added an additional 100 officers. That's not going to be enough. They need to create safe spaces for officers to whistleblow, and they also need to have an independent oversight when allegations are made externally by victims as well as internally about sexual abuse, violence, misogyny, sexism, because clearly they're not fit for purpose themselves to investigate it.
You see, that's the thing, isn't it? Because I'm trying to think of, these are all things to look at the situation and investigate why this reporting was not, why this wasn't found out. Well, what changes can they actually make to stop recruiting these kind of officers in the first place? Because that seems to be the issue. If they had investigated him properly, he wouldn't have even been an officer in the first place. So what can they do there?
Well, they've admitted themselves that their vetting process for him in that particular situation wasn't robust enough. And I suspect that if they do a deep dive into any organisation across the UK, they'll find that their vetting processes are not robust enough. These officers that apply for the Metropolitan Police or for policing have a tick box on an online. So they'll be asked questions like, have you got any affiliations to any, political affiliations, or are you, actively engaged in porn sites or something like that? And if they just tick the box to say no, no, and no, there's then no further scrutiny around that to actually go and check what they're actually doing, and they pass through the net. And so the processes of how they vet officers, it is. I know you're.
So I could just. Are you a rapist? No. Have you ever? You'd obviously tick. No, this is not. It's really not good enough, is it? I cannot believe that is what passes for vetting.
Well, look, Baroness Casey is undertaking a review already, and there's been a previous report. There's the full report due out, I think, certainly quite soon. And what I would say is that the Met needs a full-blown inquiry into why this serving officer, because let's not forget, he's still serving. He's suspended, he's in custody, and he's earning a full-time wage.
Yeah, no, well, I'd cut him off straight away. He wouldn't be paid. Shabnam Chowdhury, thank you very much for joining me. She's a former detective superintendent at the Metropolitan Police. Moving on to Nicola Sturgeon. She's accused the UK government of using trans people as a political weapon if they seek to block the gender reforms passed by the Scottish Parliament. Now, this comes as multiple reports suggest that Sunak will move to block Scotland's gender recognition law this week, using constitutional powers, which will put him on course for a major clash with the Scottish government. The legislation was also backed by the Scottish Labour Party, but Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has voiced his concerns with the legislation, saying that 16 is too young for such a decision to be made. So are Labour divided on the issue of gender? Joining me now to discuss this is political and social commentator Ling Mai. Lynn, thank you very much for joining me. I'm sorry, I'm astounded that anyone would consider that 16 would be a decent age with no checks and balances, to be able to say, I'm changing gender now? I mean, where's your view on this?
I'm really happy that Keir Starmer has actually come out and said it's too young. He's been flip-flopping around the trans conversation for a long time, like, what's a woman, so on and so forth. But he's taken an ardent approach here, and I think it's a really good move. For the simple fact that even if you have a look on the NHS website, they themselves say that even when it comes to puberty blockers, they don't know the effects it's going to have on bone density, on the mind of a young person. So it's definitely too young. So I'm glad that he's taken this approach.
Well, it's ridiculous that she'd even consider that this is a good thing. But then looking at it, though, this was backed by the Scottish Labour Party. I don't know what their thinking is. I don't know what on earth is going in their minds to think that this is a good thing. I just don't understand.
Yeah, well, separate to that, I do feel something for Scotland, for the simple fact that what does that say about devolution? They've got their government, but Section 35 says that they can renege on that and the UK can essentially block them. And if they're in support of this, I understand why they would be angry. But overall, 16 is far too young.
Well, I don't think this... I mean, I'm just had a guess. I'm thinking the Scottish people themselves will be saying, I don't think so. And I suspect this is going to be a vote loser for Nicola Sturgeon if she thinks that people are going to go behind it. Because why on earth... I just can't see anyone in their right mind thinking that's a good thing. It's a big decision which has further implications. Therefore, at 16... you are too young to make that sort of life-changing choice.
Exactly, and with this legislation, they don't have to declare that they're being seen by a psychologist. Again, if you look at the NHS website, there's so many different processes that have to occur before they even suggest that they can look at gender reassignment or anything of that nature. So this legislation will mean that they can just self-assign themselves to a different gender. But my thing is this. If we're saying, especially prior to Keir Starmer saying this, in the Labour Party, we don't know what a woman is. If we don't know what a woman is, we don't know what a man is, why is there a need to change gender? What are you changing from if we don't know, if we can't say what a woman is and we can't say what a man is?
And also, actually, the stereotype of gender is a social construct that we've created. So this is what a man does, this is what a woman does. We've sort of, if you don't fit into those narratives of that social construct that we have created, then you might think that you need to change gender and that you're in the wrong body simply because in your mind you believe that you behave more like a woman or that you move towards that. So I think as you get older, you start to construct your brain in a sort of more malleable way in which you start to identify with the traits that you feel comfortable with and you're not worried about whether you're called a man or a woman.
Exactly, and you cast yourself back to not long ago when you were 16.
Oh, yeah. A couple of years ago, 2 years ago, yeah.
Well, when I was 16, we had a world of thoughts of what we wanted to do, what we were, and then we changed the year after and then changed again and changed again. Yeah. So how can... It's a lifelong decision and people are not having that conversation about people that are detransitioning back as well because they didn't go through the necessary checks in the process.
Well, it's not just that as well, because it actually opens this out now to any predator who wants to then say, I'm a woman when you're not a woman, but you're a predator. It opens it out to the whole prison idea as well. Exactly. And people might then do this change in Scotland and then come to the UK with it. So they'll use it as a bit like the Greta Green sort of thing, the Greta Green effect, where you can go there, get married, and then quickly, instead of you'd have to go there to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, listen, Miley, thank you very much for... Did I get that right? No, it's Ling Mai.
Yeah, Ling Mai.
Ling Mai. See, all of it wrong. All of it totally wrong. Thank you so much. Right, some breaking news to bring you onto this topic. The UK government has decided to block the Scottish gender bill designed to make it easier for people to change their legally recognised gender. Let's get the latest with our political reporter, Olivia Utley. Olivia, we were just talking about it now.
Yes, so this is an unprecedented move from the UK government. It's enacted Section 35, which will essentially put a block on royal assent of this bill, which was agreed in Holyrood last year. We expected this was coming, but that doesn't really make it any less of a sort of constitutional bomb, if you like. Essentially, what Alistair Jack's argument is, who's the Scottish Secretary, is that that there will be a UK-wide impact which, with the gender recognition bill, which wouldn't be compatible with the English Equalities Act. And you could have a situation where someone who is facing awaiting trial for sexual offences, a male body person awaiting trial in Scotland, getting a gender recognition certificate there, being tried in England and ending up going to a women's prison. He also raised concerns in his letter to Nicola Sturgeon about the effect on women in Scotland too. And we know that this bill was hugely controversial controversial. It was rushed through Holyrood late last year. I went to the second reading of it, and the atmosphere was just electric. I mean, there were nearly 100 women in the room wearing suffragette colours, protesting at every opportunity. And they felt as though this was being rushed through essentially because Nicola Sturgeon wanted to pick a fight with the Westminster government and wanted to create this kind of constitutional chaos. It feels as though if this was a trap that Nicola Sturgeon has set, the UK government has walked into it, although it's hard to see how they could avoid doing so. Essentially, creating legislation this controversial with this UK-wide impact was always going to mean that the UK government basically had to step in. But of course, you've now got Nicola Sturgeon and Stephen Flynn, the SNP man in Westminster, claiming that this is, even if you don't agree with the issue of gender, this is an issue for Scottish democracy. And they are framing it as the UK government is putting a roadblock on Scotland's democratic will.
Very interesting that she's trying to position it that way, but I suspect the Scottish people will probably be on the side of the English on this one. I doubt they'll like it. Lynn, I'm going to ask you for some your thoughts on this then, because, I mean, we were just talking about it, and it's breaking news.
I'm glad.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad. And I do think, and I agree, that Nicola Sturgeon has done this as a sort of angst against Westminster, essentially, and she's politicised it. So I'm glad that Rishi Sunak has found himself and done what is necessary.
Well, Olivia, do you think that this could be... Because I know that Nicola Sturgeon probably, I mean, potentially has done this as a sort of ploy to try and show that actually Scotland should be independent and not be controlled by Westminster. But could it backfire on her? Because the Scottish people probably, I would suggest, the majority would probably agree with the English.
Well, it might not be as straightforward as that. Essentially, what the polls in Scotland show about the Gender Recognition Act isn't so much that people are against it, it's mainly that people don't really understand what it is. They're not interested in the issue. And that's not really surprising when you look at the figures. So last year, for example, 30 people in Scotland gained a gender recognition certificate. And the Scottish Government expects that that could rise to around 250 or 300 if this legislation were to go ahead. So it affects a very tiny proportion of the population. So most of Scotland isn't particularly interested in it. What Nicola Sturgeon is hoping and banking on is that she will go to the Scottish people and say, essentially, that Britain has put a roadblock on Scotland's democracy, therefore you should vote for independence. They will see that Section 35 has been enacted. They will see that Alistair Jack's saying no to legislation that was passed in Holyrood. And without really understanding what the legislation is, they will support her claim for independence. Of course, Rishi Sunak is hoping that people just find the bill very strange and unnecessary and don't like it and therefore side with the English. But it's a tricky game.
Well, we'll see. I mean, perhaps the Scottish people will be more interested in exactly what it is. Let's hope they are. Olivia Utley, thank you very much. And also, Lynn May. I got it right, finally. I got it right. Right, up next, it's Dubes & Co with Michelle Dewberry, who's here in the studio. Michelle, good to see you. What have you got coming up on the show?
Hello, Nanny. Yes, in my view anyway, common sense has prevailed when it comes to that Scottish gender bill. I know that it will divide opinions, so I'm interested in viewers' response to that. Also, Starmer, he's saying the NHS should not be treated like a shrine, and it is indeed time for reform. Are Labour then the party to do it? Are they the ones for the job? I'm fascinated to hear people's views on that. And also, when it comes to the wealth of people in this country, does it matter that, for example, 1% of people, depending on which reports you believe, apparently have more wealth than something like 70% of the population? Does that matter? Why? And should there be a wealth tax? And Albanians, are they becoming kind of political football? Because there's been a lot of conversation, narrative, whatever you want to call it, surrounding the Burt crossings and lots of criticism towards the government in the terms of the language that they are using around these people. All of that's come at 6.
Well, looking forward to it, Michelle. Thank you so much for that. Well, lots of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts on teachers striking. Stephen says, my daughter is a newly qualified teacher. While she wants, obviously, to maximise earnings, she accepted the job knowing the level of pay. She wanted to keep her head down and concentrate on work, but has been bombarded with texts, emails from her union saying that we can see you haven't voted, please ensure you do. These became so frequent that she had to block her details. Wow. Well, you've been with me. I'm Nana Akua. I'm in for Patrick Christy here on GB News. On the way, it's Michelle Dewberry with Dubes & Co. I'll be back tomorrow at the same time at 3 o'clock. Please join me there. But right now, we'll give you some weather. Michelle is up next.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGibbon from the Met Office. Cold winds from the Arctic have arrived, bringing overnight a widespread frost, snow and ice for some, but also clear spells for many. The winds at the moment coming from the north and passing over, well, relatively mild seas, and as that occurs, they pick up